Chapter 120. Cobb Forest was foggy all year round. Even in the afternoon, when the sun was at its peak and the temperature was the highest, the fog in the forest would still reduce the visibility to within 300 to 400 meters. Therefore, for Francis, who had been running for 2 to 3 kilometers, he could no longer tell which way was east, which was west, which was north, which was south. Here, the dazzling sunlight above his head was completely blocked by the lush trees and the fog. When walking in the forest, the brightness of the surrounding environment was like the evening when the sun was about to set. Under such circumstances, the chirping of insects and birds in the forest would become more and more noisy. Sometimes it would even be a little ear-piercing. Francis was extremely anxious at this time. As the eldest son of the Duke and the descendant of the most powerful noble in the Ifta territory, his living conditions had always been good since he was young. Soft beds, warm fireplaces in winter, exquisite and nutritious meals, excellent education. So for many years, he had not really suffered much. Other than staying in the farmhouse when he was patrolling the border, he had never survived in the wild. So in terms of survival in the wild, he was not even comparable to a mercenary who had just entered the profession. And with such experience growing up, it was not surprising that he had lost his way in the forest. Staring straight ahead, the dark forest in Francis's eyes had become a horrible hell that he had never imagined. His breathing was rapid, his wand was soaked in sweat, and the warhorse under him was too tired to run any more. All kinds of inexplicable noises in his ears made him even more nervous, and he could not relax. I miscalculated. Francis wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. His heart was beating so fast that he could hear it clearly. His mind was in a mess. He had never thought that Sally would have such a powerful backup plan. No wonder she would run to the west gate without caring about anything. It turned out that this cunning sister of his had already planned everything. After looking back to make sure that there were no pursuers, Francis took a deep breath and relaxed a little. But he still raised his wand and continued to condense the elements of the ice shield around him. The resentment that had accumulated in his heart along the way finally erupted at this moment. He couldn't help but say fiercely, "Just you wait, I'll definitely make you die without a burial place." But just as he finished speaking, he felt his hair stand on end. Just as he was about to raise his head to look around, the ice shield beside him exploded with a caw sound. The ice shield was originally hidden in the air, and it would only appear when it was attacked. But at this moment, Francis widened his eyes and stared at the white cracks on the shield on his left. The cobweb-like pattern had a radius of 1 meter. Upon closer inspection, he saw a long arrow nailed to the outside of the shield. While he was in a daze, another shadow flashed in the dark forest. In his field of vision, the second arrow shot through the head of the warhorse he was riding. The horse that was originally moving forward immediately fell forward, and Francis leaned forward uncontrollably. In the next moment, the third arrow shattered the ice shield that could no longer be maintained. The arrow brushed past the back of his head, leaving a 3-centimeter-long gash on it. If not for the fact that the shield had deflected the arrow a little when it shattered, Francis's head would have been pierced by the arrow. Plop! Francis, who fell to the ground, couldn't care less about the cold sweat all over his body. He immediately turned over and rolled away from the corpse of the war horse. He quickly waved the wand in his hand and released a second ice shield. Then, he rolled and crawled towards a big tree on the side. In just a second, the shield that he had just released was hit again with a click. But this time, the arrow slid off the shield and only left a white scratch on it. The long arrow was still going strong and was nailed to the trunk of the tree next to him. Francis was so scared that his heart almost stopped beating. Francis was running away in a panic. For an honorable elementalist, he was absolutely terrified. However, Francis did not have the time to maintain his demeanor. He knew that if he was one step slower, he would definitely lose his life. That was because no matter how slow he was, he still knew who had shot those arrows. That damn scout that always messed up his plans. Roddy, how dare you sneak attack me? You are treason. You are, Pa. The arrow almost brushed past Francis' ear. The arrowhead splashed on his face along with the pieces of tree bark, directly interrupting his incoherent speech. This scumbag, this bastard, the speed of magic power gathering increased. Francis cursed as he tried his best to restore the form of the ice shield. His heart was mixed with anger and fear, but he didn't know which one was more important. Before he met Roddy, Francis never believed that the power of the arrow could penetrate the ice shield. Different from plate armor and chain armor, the magic shield had a very high defense against long-range piercing damage because of its spherical structure. It could even directly resist most of the attacks. What was more undeniable was that the power of the arrow would always be weaker than the power of the close-range sword. Ordinary sword attacks might not even be able to break the ice shield in one shot. But just now, he was almost shot to death by the continuous arrows. This situation could only mean one thing. Roddy's attack was not only powerful, but the moment the arrow hit the shield, the angle of the arrow was perpendicular to the spherical surface of the shield, so the power of the arrow reached the maximum. This had always been a theoretical value, belonging to the situation of, if it was achieved, it was purely a coincidence. But just now, Francis had personally experienced what it meant to be marvelous. Roddy's archery allowed him to dance face to face with the Grim Reaper. After figuring out the key points, Francis was in despair to find that the small fry in the distance, who was originally not worth mentioning, now had the ability to take his life at any time. Impossible! This is definitely a coincidence. He breathed heavily, trying to calm the fear in his heart, but his body could not stop shaking. But soon he realized that he was too cowardly, so he immediately bit the tip of his tongue and forced himself to calm down. As an advanced elementalist and a noble, Francis had always been proud. Since he became a magic class at the age of 20, it was always others who were amazed by his talent. Since when did Francis ever feel jealous of others? But now, he really experienced such a low-level emotion, and what followed was a great backlash from his self-esteem. Although it was clear that he was now at a disadvantage, Francis immediately focused his attention on the battle with the sharp pain brought by the tip of his tongue. His nose was filled with the taste of blood, but the panic in his eyes was gradually replaced by calmness. After thinking for a while, Francis reached into his arms and took out 2 bottles and a scroll. He calmed his mind and then narrowed his eyes slightly. When have I, Francis, ever been afraid of an enemy? Ignoring the blood on the back of his head, he held his wand tightly and whispered to himself. In the silent forest, a silent confrontation began. Francis leaned against a tree trunk, calmed his breath, and immediately raised his wand. After chanting for 3 seconds, he released a buff spell called Elemental Condensation, followed by Elemental Sensitivity, which had a casting time of 5 seconds, and then Elemental Sentries, one after another. After casting a dozen Elemental Sentries in a row, he immediately opened a bottle of blue potion and poured it into his mouth. Then he clenched his teeth and endured the violent impact of the potion on his internal organs and brain. Such a process was indeed his only choice at the moment. Elemental condensation could maintain the elemental density around his body at a relatively high level. Although it consumed a lot of mana with the existence of such a buff, his casting speed and the power of his spells could be increased by 15%. And elemental sensitivity, combined with elemental sentries, was similar to a spider using the vibration of its web to detect the movement of its prey. In other words, Francis could now detect the approaching enemy through all the elemental sentries within a 50-meter radius. This was the most effective way for an elemental master to fight against an assassin or a long-range archer. But from another perspective, any low-level elemental master would be in a situation of mana depletion after casting all these skills. Therefore, without the support of intermediate magic potion, very few people would use this extravagant way to deal with an enemy. However, Francis, who had 2 bottles of mana recovery potion in his hands, really put up a desperate fight against Roddy. When all the skills were cast, Francis, who had his back against the tree trunk to recover his magic power, finally regained some of his confidence. He had already condensed a fireball in his hand, ready to attack at any time. Crack! Dozens of meters away, the subtle sound of branches breaking was almost inaudible, but Francis, who had set up dozens of elemental sentries, immediately jumped out from behind the tree trunk, raised his hand, and threw out a fireball. In the dark forest, a yellow trace suddenly flew across, followed by a loud explosion. The fireball, with the help of elemental condensation, was very powerful, and even its speed was much faster than ordinary fireballs. It directly blew up a giant tree that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around it, and the released shockwave rolled up a lot of fallen leaves and dust. It was very powerful. However, during this process, Francis stared at the distance, and his expression did not relax at all. The next moment, when the giant tree was falling sideways, Francis suddenly noticed the shadow of a moving cloak in the range of the elemental sentries. He instantly threw out 3 icicle spells, and the white shadow that flashed across the air immediately nailed itself on a distant tree root. Through the white mist that rose when the icicle broke, Francis vaguely saw some pieces of cloak that were torn. "Idiot! You're dead!" He snorted coldly and immediately retreated to hide behind another tree. The crack sound beside his ear meant that the arrow that Roddy shot back at him was easily cut off by the shield. Although neither of them hit the other in this round, Francis obviously thought that he had the upper hand. Francis drank another mouthful of potion and raised his hand to grab the magic scroll that could instantly cast level 3 Frost Nova. At this time, he had completely regained his confidence. However, the confident Francis would never have thought that at this time, Roddy, who was standing at the edge of the detection range of the elemental sentries, with the help of the stealth spell, was shaking his head disdainfully. Chapter 121. At this time, in the year 588 of the Elon calendar, Francis' fighting style was inherited from his master. In this era, due to the scarcity of magic professions and the high status of elementalists, very few people were willing to clash with elementalists. As for Francis, he didn't have much experience in all-out battles. His training in the past had always been about stopping at the right time. So now, although his response was passable, in Roddy's eyes, it was not outstanding at all. Noob. This was Roddy's evaluation of Francis. No matter how fast his spellcasting speed or how powerful his spells were, a noob was still a noob. For a ranger who had fought in the PvP battlefield for many years and was familiar with almost all professions and skills, Francis could only bluff those who had little PvP experience. In the highest level of PvP battles, any flaw could lead to death. In Roddy's eyes, Francis' response was full of flaws. But from another perspective, this was the result of Roddy's calculations. The reason why Francis was at a loss was because Roddy knew the limitations of the elementalist's skill, so he had long planned for this battle to break out in this dark and complicated forest. Of course, planning in such a complicated situation had a lot of uncertainty. For example, Roddy could choose to shoot Francis to death in the square, or he could choose to kill him at the city gate while he was chasing after Sally. But these were not Roddy's priorities. Killing a count in the city square would not benefit the Lucifron family at all, and it might even set off a bigger storm. From any point of view, the quieter Francis died, the more Roddy would benefit from it. Adhering to this principle, Roddy had long set up an ambush in the forest with Sodeler and the others so that he could destroy the corpses and get rid of the evidence. And now, although there were some deviations in the plan, resulting in a one-on-one situation between himself and Francis, for Roddy, there was really no suspense in this battle. Seeing Francis hiding behind the tree with confidence restored, Roddy sneered and took 2 steps back. Although there were some leaves and weeds rustling, it did not alert Francis at all. This was because the furthest detection range of the elemental sentry was 50 meters away, and now Roddy was 53 meters away from Francis. Do you really think the elemental sentry can cover all angles? It's not good to be lazy when learning skills. Roddy took out a long arrow and slowly and silently nailed it into the tree trunk in front of him. Then, he casually took off his cloak that had a corner torn by the icicle and put it on the arrow. Because he was behind the tree, Francis could not see what he was doing. After hanging up the cloak, Roddy glanced at Francis, who was not moving in the distance. It felt like he was back to the time when he fought against players from the opposing faction in the forest. Francis' spells were powerful, and the elemental sentry was an excellent skill to master the first attack. Therefore, in his eyes, Roddy's appearance was equivalent to a flaw. Under the complicated conditions of the forest, 50 meters was the limit of the shooting range. Even if Roddy could really hit him from such a long distance, the ice shield would be able to block the damage. At the same time, he could also confirm Roddy's position and counterattack. Therefore, Francis thought that victory was in his hands. However, he neglected a problem. Although the detection range of the elemental sentry was large, there was always a blind spot above. Therefore, when Roddy silently climbed up the tree trunk and slowly approached Francis's head, the elementalist who was holding his wand and waiting for Roddy to appear was still nervous and focused all his attention on the feedback from the elemental sentry. He did not notice some movements among the insects and birds above his head. Time passed quietly. After 4 to 5 minutes, Roddy was already close to Francis. At this time, he was 15 meters away from the ground. If he directly launched an attack, he would be less than 10 meters away from Francis when he landed. This was the limit of the detection range of Francis's senses. After stopping, Roddy, who had used the stealth spell to hide his body, looked down at the tree trunk where Francis was hiding, and then turned his head to look at the arrow that had caught his cloak. At this time, he was at an angle where he could just see the tail of the arrow. "Let's hope it works this time," he murmured in his heart, then raised the short bow in his hand, pulled out 2 arrows, and quickly shot them into the distance. This short bow from the rose cross was of excellent quality. Even when the bow was fully drawn, there was not much vibration or sound. At this time, to be on the safe side, Roddy only pulled 1/3 of the bow before shooting the arrow. Therefore, the sound of the bowstring slicing through the air was not heard by Francis at all. 2 weak arrows flew out. The first one landed on the edge of the elemental sentry, while the second one hit the tail of the arrow that was caught in the cloak. In Francis's senses, when the first arrow landed on the ground, he immediately reacted. He took a step forward and directly jumped out from behind the tree. At first, he was still a little hesitant to cast the fireball spell, but when he saw the edge of the cloak behind the tree trunk, he immediately confirmed Roddy's position and cast it. Boom! Francis looked at the explosion in the distance with a ferocious expression. When the torn cloak flashed in his sight, he could not help but feel happy. That guy was killed. However, before the joy completely emerged from the bottom of his heart, a loud crack behind him made him turn his head in astonishment. For the second time, a long arrow nailed into his ice shield at an absolutely vertical angle, leaving a large white crack mark on the shield. *T. Francis, who thought that he was attacked from behind, waved his hand to restore the ice shield, but when he looked through the shield, he was horrified to find that a figure had already jumped down from the tree trunk and was directly in front of him. 2 scimitars flashing with cold light slashed on the shield in front of Francis at lightning speed. Caw! Roddy's first knife directly smashed through the hole created by the arrow, and the second knife directly disintegrated the egg-shaped shield. The blade of the knife almost grazed Francis's chest. If he did not take a step back at the critical moment, his head would have been separated from his body. This was the first time that the two of them had a face-to-face confrontation. Francis did not expect that Roddy would launch an attack in such an unpredictable way. In desperation, he immediately raised the scroll in his hand, poured the magic energy into it, and shouted the activation spell, Frost Nova. But Roddy's reaction was far faster than him. He could have swung his knife for the third time and continued to attack Francis, but when he saw the blue scroll in Francis's hand, he only blinked his eyes and decided to retreat. Before Francis finished chanting the Frost Nova spell, Roddy released the profession skill of Witcher. Leap! A strong force suddenly filled his legs. Roddy gritted his teeth and stepped back quickly. In a blink of an eye, he had jumped 4 meters away. Including the few steps he had taken before, he was now standing about 8 meters away from Francis. However, Roddy immediately stopped and watched as the Frost Nova swept out from the scroll in Francis's hand. Swoosh! White frost spread out from Francis's body. The extremely cold power even froze the flowers and trees on the ground and directly shattered them. After casting this spell, Francis's originally shocked expression turned into a grin. In his opinion, this level 3 Frost Nova could definitely freeze Roddy into an ice cube. Even if Roddy could resist the cold damage, his subsequent icicle would definitely shoot him to death. But this kind of expression then froze on his face. Roddy stood there with the scimitar in his hand. The frost spread out and the cold air swept towards him. However, it dissipated 10 centimeters away from him and lost its original power. Frost Nova, which only had a range of 8 meters, was cast in vain just like that. And at the moment when the spell ended, Roddy had already rushed towards him with his scimitar. Unable to hide the horror in his heart, Francis hurriedly tried to release a shield again. But just as he raised his wand, Roddy's scimitar had already slashed down. At this critical moment, Francis had an idea. He directly raised his wand to block in front of him, using almost all his magic power to freeze the wand into a big icicle. Crack! The frozen wand was directly cut in half, but Francis took the opportunity to roll to the side. But such dodging was futile. His martial arts were not even worth mentioning in front of Roddy. After casting the Shadow Waltz, Francis did not even have time to cast a second spell in the dim light before he was caught up by Roddy. The scimitar mercilessly cut off his arm. Puff! Blood splattered. Roddy followed up with a kick directly to the back of Francis's heart. The huge force sent Francis flying directly. Dong! He hit a tree and then rolled on the ground. My hand! Only then did the pain reach his brain. Francis screamed in pain. He looked at his arm that was cut off at the elbow. Before he could continue to shout, the shadow of the scimitar flashed again. The tendon of his left ankle was cut off. The heart-wrenching pain almost drove Francis completely crazy. He screamed, desperately trying to crawl away, but was kicked over by Roddy and then stepped on his chest. Killing someone, especially a traitor in the future, would not make Roddy uncomfortable at all. But the reason why he did not chop off Francis's head was that he still had something to say. Come, look at me. Stop shouting. His voice was very calm. Francis, who was screaming, was in so much pain that tears and snot flowed down his face. But at this time, there was no room for resistance. His body violently rolled over, trying to escape. But before he could turn over, a scimitar stabbed into the side of his face. The edge of the scimitar was close to Francis's face, and there was still blood on the cold blade. Francis's scream stopped abruptly, but it changed to, "Don't kill me! Don't kill me! I can promise you anything! Don't! Okay, answer a few questions for me, and I won't kill you." Roddy bent down and looked at the pale Earl. "Hurry up, or I won't be able to save you if you bleed too much." Chapter 122. Only 3 minutes later, the sound of galloping hooves could be heard from afar. The firelight was too obvious in the dark forest, and the previous explosion reminded Sodeler and the others of the direction they were going. When they rushed into the area where Roddy and Francis were fighting, everyone immediately felt some pressure. The mess caused by the fireball was naturally a strong visual impact to ordinary people. More than 10 trees had fallen, and the fallen leaves on the ground had been blown away by the shockwave of the fireball explosion. Black smoke filled the air, and some dry branches were still burning. The surroundings were unusually quiet. A white circular mark could be seen from afar. The effect of frost nova was very obvious in the forest. The white mist that rose due to the low temperature was like the cloud effect caused by dry ice on a stage. When Sodeler and the others arrived, they vaguely saw a figure in the white mist. Sally had been charging at the front the entire time. Her eyes were wide open, and when she saw that indistinct silhouette in the thicket, her heart was already in her throat. Right now, she was about to urge her horse forward, but she was immediately stopped by Sodeler. Although he knew that she was the daughter of his immediate superior, the Dukes of Angmar, at this time, Sodeler's priority was Roddy's orders. He made a few tactical gestures, and 4 people behind him jumped off their horses and began to spread out. The short bows in their hands were already aimed at the figure in the distance. However, they had only taken a few steps when a voice that left Sally scratching her head came from afar. "Ultraman!" The scout walking in front immediately opened his mouth and replied, "Little monster!" Then they put down their short bows and ran forward. Obviously, this was the contact signal that Roddy and they had already tacitly agreed on. "It's okay. Roddy is over there." Sodeler finally breathed a sigh of relief. After hearing this, Sally immediately jumped off her horse and ran over. But when she came not far from Roddy and saw Francis lying on the ground, unable to move, she unsurprisingly stopped. Francis' severed arm was still bleeding, but there were 2 strips of cloth wrapped around it to stop the bleeding. His right leg was dangling, and his handsome face was as pale as a piece of paper. When he saw Sally appear in front of him, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he couldn't make any extra sound for a long time. Obviously, the Earl never thought that he would reunite with Sally in such a situation. He swallowed several mouthfuls of saliva. The strong desire to survive in his heart seemed to sink little by little with the arrival of Sally. "Ah, Sally, I'm almost done with him. Come and talk to him." Roddy seemed to be introducing an old friend to Sally. "Look, he seems to have something to say to you." "Well, Sodeler, let's take a few steps back." As he stepped back, he wanted to give the siblings some space, but as soon as he took a step, his words came to an abrupt halt, because Sally had already walked in front of him, stretched out her hand, and gently touched a small wound on the side of his neck. It was a scratch caused by the splinters from the explosion of the fireball. The wound was so small that he didn't notice it at all. "You're hurt." Sally was a head shorter than Roddy, so when she spoke to Roddy, she raised her head slightly. It's nothing, just a small wound." "Ha!" Roddy laughed dryly, but in his heart, he was wondering why Sally didn't settle the score with Francis directly, but instead cared about him first. He pointed to the guy on the ground who was gasping for breath and said, "That he—" Before he could finish, Roddy froze there. Sally opened her arms and directly threw herself into his arms. Her seemingly thin arms somehow gained strength and strangled Roddy's mouth. Roddy was so stunned that he looked like a fish out of oxygen. The scouts surrounding them all had different expressions, but they all looked into the distance. Sodeler's face twitched as he turned his head away, muttering to himself, "You've got guts." As for Francis, no one seemed to care whether he was still lying here or not. Smelling the familiar scent on Roddy, Sally felt that her heart that had been hanging for a long time was finally at ease. After the nervousness and anxiety, her heart seemed to be filled with some kind of emotion. Her beautiful oval face leaned over and stuck to Roddy's chest for a long time, as if she didn't want to leave. But Roddy's thoughts at the moment were not romantic at all. The only thing he wanted to say was, "Sally is so king strong." Although his EQ was low and he wasn't interested in women, fortunately, Roddy knew that he shouldn't push her away at this time. After thinking for a long time, he realized that his arms were like a hanger, so he hurriedly put them down and awkwardly patted Sally's back. He said in a low voice somewhat awkwardly, "Well, it's okay. Don't be afraid." He stammered out words that he didn't quite understand. In his memory, the male lead always said the same thing when he hugged and comforted the female lead. In fact, Roddy didn't know what Sally's current mental state was. He still wanted to say something, but he heard Sally, who had buried her head in his arms, suddenly burst into laughter. "Silly," her whisper was clear, but Roddy didn't know how to refute it at all. He just stood there in a daze. Fortunately, Sally didn't continue to stay in his arms. She let go of her hands and looked at Roddy shyly for a second, then turned to the side. "Now that I think about it, I don't know how many times I have been saved by you." Sally looked at the traces of frost nova in the distance and said. Then she stretched out her hand and said coquettishly, "Lend it to me for a while." Ah! Roddy didn't understand. He looked at the direction where Sally stretched out her hand. It seemed to be the scimitar at his waist. He was stunned and pointed to the hilt and said, "This?" "Yes, let me use it." Sally raised her head. Her original emotions seemed to be suppressed at this moment. When she looked at Roddy, the corners of her mouth were still slightly raised. "Why? Don't you believe me?" Roddy felt that her words were a bit strange, but he still handed the scimitar to her. The blade was wide and heavy. When Sally held it, it was obvious that it was falling down, but she still weighed it and then turned around. The smile on her face was still there, but when she looked at Francis, the smile on the corner of her mouth suddenly turned cold. Francis seemed to realize what it meant for her to hold the scimitar at this time. He opened his mouth and endured the severe pain all over his body. "Sally, listen to me." Puff! When the sound of the scimitar cutting into the flesh sounded in the forest, the eyebrows of Roddy and others all jumped together. Blood splashed almost 2 or 3 meters away. Sally didn't know how to use the scimitar, but after holding the hilt with both hands, she smashed the blade on Francis' head with more force than before. No one around stopped her. In other words, at this moment, even Roddy was not qualified to stop what Sally wanted to do. Crack! 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 After dozens of slashes, Francis' body was like a pile of minced meat. This kind of workload was really a bit big for Sally. When she stopped panting, the hilt in her hand had been soaked with sticky blood. Her face and body were splashed with blood, and the original pure white robe had been dyed red at this time. Phew! Hacking a person to death didn't mean that Sally could face such a corpse without changing her expression. She breathed heavily and handed the scimitar to Roddy. Then she staggered 2 steps and directly lay on the side to vomit. Roddy hurried to support her, but felt that the cold little hand tightly grasped his arm. At the same time, Sally's soft voice traveled into his ears. "You said that when I think of a way to deal with him, I'll come to you. Now I've thought it through and I've done it." "I did it too." Her delicate body leaned on him. It was a little difficult for Sally to stand due to exhaustion, but the words she said made Roddy's heart feel indescribable. He didn't understand. The reason why Sally could clench her teeth and chop Francis into minced meat with her own hands was that she didn't want to embarrass Roddy. Roddy only saw the seemingly ruthless and decisive side of Sally, but he didn't know that she didn't have much killing intent. The reason why she did it was actually to repay. Sally didn't want Roddy to bear the guilt of murdering an aristocrat, so she chose to do it herself. Of course, she also didn't know that Roddy, a time traveler, actually didn't have any feelings for aristocrats at all. Therefore, the two of them really had a feeling of guessing each other wrong at this time. Let's go, Roddy. Suppressing the disgusting feeling, Sally dragged Roddy away like a willful child, while Sodeler and the rest of the scouts began to clean up the battlefield. Looking at the Earl, who was chopped into minced meat, they felt shocked, but at the same time, they couldn't help but think of a saying. There is never a pure aristocrat walking far away. Roddy naturally didn't have the mood to think about these things. Although Sally said she was dragging him, she was actually still very weak. After a few steps, it became him holding Sally. After walking for dozens of meters, when Roddy was about to let her get on the prepared horse, Sally suddenly stopped and looked at her toes. She wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Did I scare you? Roddy thought it was indeed a little bit, but he still touched the tip of his nose and replied, "It's okay. In fact, your thoughts and mine, how should I put it, should be relatively the same. Ahem, it's unnecessary to let this guy talk nonsense. It's also not like that." Halfway through his words, he found that Sally was looking at him with bright eyes. Fool. Roddy didn't know why he received such an evaluation. He scratched the back of his head. He originally wanted to ask something, but seeing her weak state, he seemed a little discouraged. In the end, he reached out and helped her pull the blood-stained robe. Just as he was about to say something like, "Hurry up and go back," he saw Sally suddenly stretch out her hand. Puzzled, Roddy looked down and found that in Sally's hand was the voodoo die he had given her. "If you take it seriously, I will take it seriously. That's the oath you made back then." Sally's eyelashes trembled slightly, trying hard to suppress the embarrassment in her heart. She softly said the words that she had wanted to say for a long time. "Then now are you willing to be my knight?" For the noblewomen of this era, the meaning of knight was self-evident. And saying such words, it almost meant that she was unilaterally confessing. Perhaps no matter which man stood in front of her at this moment, they would feel a rush of hot blood rushing to the top of their head. Then, they would definitely kneel down on one knee and loudly express, "I am definitely willing," and so on and so forth, but of all things, this guy standing in front of her had a screw loose in his head. Knight, Roddy's laughter made Sally, whose heart was beating non-stop, raise her head in confusion. Her oval face was already blushing, and she really couldn't think of what was so funny about it. But then, Roddy's answer immediately made her expression become interesting. Chapter 123. It was dusk, and the atmosphere in Hollier was solemn. The incident that happened that day was too bloody, so much so that the entire city was in a state of martial law since the afternoon. To the public, it was said to be searching for heretics, and the comforting words were, "The situation is under effective control." As for whether it was true or not, it was hard for the commoners and even the nobles to know. After all, this incident only involved religion, and did not affect the interests of the nobles. Naturally, they could not be bothered to care. But while there were people watching from the sidelines, there were also people who were in a terrible state. Akasha, who was running for her life, felt that her legs were almost numb. It was hard to describe her feelings at that moment. She did not know whether to say it was anger, grievance, self-blame, or regret. In short, when all of these emotions were mixed together, she felt that the blood in her body was cold. It was not easy for her to make up her mind to leave the Viper Cross, but she suddenly encountered such an incident. To Akasha, it was an outcome that was hard to accept, because when everything went wrong, she still did not understand the reason. Akasha felt that she was innocent. She had provided Rubens with information about Gallop, and she did not cooperate with Gallop to attack at the critical moment. But in the end, Rubens, who had promised her to join the Rose Cross and clear her name, actually attacked her with divine arts on the spot, and even ordered the soldiers to kill all of her subordinates. When she saw the Holy Temple guards pouncing on her and her subordinates, her heart was dead, and her mind was only left with the instinct to escape. Because she had the identity of a priest of light, she finally managed to escape under the cover of her subordinates, and ran all the way to the relatively remote Cambay district of Hollier. After the sun had set, there were no streetlights in the gloomy Cambay district. Her current state could be said to be groping in the dark. But the reason why Akasha walked here was because she clearly remembered that the Viper Cross had spent half a year digging a secret tunnel here. And once she found the entrance of the secret tunnel, she could directly escape from Hollier City from here. As for where to go after leaving the city, she did not even think about it. The only thought in her mind was not to get caught by the Holy Temple guards. Akasha, who was walking briskly, squinted her eyes to identify the blurry scenery around her. She could barely make out the outline of the walls around her, and she could confirm that she was roughly a few hundred meters away from the entrance. At that moment, a sudden shout came from not far away. "Who is it?" Akasha was not a cunning old fox like Gallop. She had always been a priestess who followed her duties. Whether it was shrewdness or scheming, she was no match for those who delved into political struggles. So when she heard such a question, her first reaction was to run away in a panic. She could not think of any other way to deal with it. "There's someone. Catch him." The words that followed proved that Akasha's judgment was not wrong. The two temple guards had originally planned to search the entire Cambay district before leaving. Who knew that they would actually find a suspicious target after a simple bluff? They immediately chased after the target with large strides. In terms of physical strength, the three Akasha could not be compared to these professional soldiers. However, her memory was extremely outstanding. She was very familiar with the Cambay district after living here for more than 10 days. She had even studied all the hidden spots in the corners of the district. Thus, she immediately turned left and right into a narrow alley. She found a low crack in the wall and crouched down to crawl in. Because she was wearing cloth shoes, Akasha's footsteps were not loud. Furthermore, the armored temple guard's footsteps were clattering as he ran. Therefore, the temple guard did not notice that she had stopped to hide and quickly ran past Akasha's eyes. Where did she go? It should be that way. There's a fork in the road. Let's split up. The two footsteps gradually left, but Akasha did not dare to act rashly. She held her breath and waited for a while. After confirming that it was safe, she quietly climbed out, and then touched the wall as she walked towards the entrance of the tunnel that was only 200 meters away. "Stay calm," Akasha said to herself in her heart. The slightest movement in her ears affected her nerves. But just when she thought that she could safely finish the rest of the journey, a sudden sharp pain in her back suddenly made her stop. Her face, which had been flushed from the continuous running, immediately paled. She immediately understood that the pain came from Bishop Jakad's curse. The punishment of whipping directly split open her back, leaving a gaping wound. "You didn't come early or late. Damn it!" She cursed, but she knew that she could not use any divine arts at the moment. In this dark environment, even the simplest beginner recovery spell would flash with blinding light, and to the holy temple guards who were searching for her, it was definitely an act of suicide. So Akasha immediately decided to endure the pain and continue running. When the wounds appeared on her back, Akasha almost bit her lips in pain. Usually, she would sit on a chair and wait for the curse to end, so she could endure the pain. But now, she was running with all her might. The pain from the wounds was many times greater than usual, and she almost screamed. But with her strong willpower, Akasha forced herself to run for almost 200 meters. When she came to the entrance not far from the secret passage, she already felt that her vision had darkened, and her legs were so heavy that she could not take another step. The intense exercise caused the blood to flow faster, and the wound on her back that was not fatal now caused her to face an unavoidable problem. If she did not stop the bleeding, she was afraid that she would really die from excessive blood loss. I'm almost there," she struggled to run the last 10 meters, but in the end she lost control and fell to the ground with a plop, but she did not give up. She gritted her teeth and used her hands to prop herself up. The back of her robe was already soaked in blood, but she could not care about stopping the bleeding. She closed her eyes and used her memory to feel for a wooden door, and then pushed it open with her body weight. The secret tunnel built by the Viper Cross was in an abandoned house not far from the city wall. Because of the failure of the operation, this tunnel had not been used by anyone. So when Akasha entered, everything was still the same as when it was built. Akasha, who almost crawled in, barely closed the door, but she did not even have the strength to fasten the door bolt. She gritted her teeth and inched towards the fireplace in the bedroom. She reached out and pulled a loose stone slab. Immediately, a dark hole appeared in the fireplace. This was the entrance to the secret tunnel. Akasha had almost exhausted all her strength to reach this step. She wanted to raise her hand to cast a recovery spell, but because of the excessive blood loss, her arm that was supporting herself against the wall suddenly went limp. She lost control of her body and fell directly into the secret tunnel. The steep slope at the entrance was more than 10 meters long. Akasha rolled all the way down and groaned in pain. She tried to stretch out her hand to stop the rolling, but in the darkness, she heard the sound of bones breaking and the pain that followed, broken bones. Akasha's heart suddenly jumped to her throat, and panic spread. Without the coordination of both hands, there was no way to release a divine spell. Now there were more than 10 bleeding wounds on her back, and the continuous blood loss made her almost unable to speak. She tried to move her fingers, but found that under the pain, her palm did not respond at all. Damn it! How could this be? Was he really going to die in this unknown place? Akasha thought unwillingly before she fainted. Back to half an hour ago. The atmosphere in the Rose Cross Monastery was solemn. Although the heretics had been punished, this attack was not good news for the sect. The enemy's madness caused a large number of casualties within the sect, and even affected many civilians, resulting in nearly 60 deaths. This kind of negative impact would probably need a long time to be eliminated. At this time, although the term crisis public relations did not exist, it was obvious that the Rose Cross sect still had the experience and ability to deal with such matters. Although it was already late at night, the streets and alleys were already plastered with notices about today's battle. Most of them had words like, "The sins of the heretics are unforgivable. They have received their due punishment." Of course, due to the large number of illiterate people, the silver coins allocated to the speakers were already in place. Tomorrow morning, there would be verbal explanations of the incident in the square and various areas of the city. With this, Rubens could directly determine the outcome of the incident and minimize the losses. The whole incident would be portrayed as a positive incident where the Rose Cross foiled the Viper Cross conspiracy. In the spiritual home room of the monastery, Rubens sat in front of the wooden table, writing letter after letter to Cardinal Cade, to the Holy Cathedral, and to the entangled subordinates of the sect's authority. He had not rested since the afternoon. Compared to his busy schedule, Cardinal Benjamin seemed to be idle. He was holding the arrow that belonged to the Rose Cross armory in a daze. When the news of Sally's disappearance reached his ears, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He immediately sent people to search for her. However, because she ran too fast, the holy knights that were sent later did not know where to start. They were still running in circles in the city, and had no idea that she had left the city a long time ago. Benjamin was a little anxious because he also received the news. Francis was also missing. He was well aware of the struggle between the siblings, and it was precisely because he was well aware that he did not casually participate in it. Naturally, there were some considerations and trade-offs that belonged to a politician. However, he did not expect that the conflict between the siblings would actually cause such a chaotic situation today. Thinking back to today's battle, although he tried his best to suppress the fear in his heart, the feeling of facing death made him feel that he had made a very wrong decision. When he remembered that he purposely let Roddy misunderstand Sally, some regret gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. But what was the use of regret? Who would have thought that this unknown, insignificant character would be able to reverse the entire situation with a single arrow, and even prevent the foundation of Hollier City's Rose Cross from being destroyed? Chapter 124. Just as he was feeling a little annoyed by these messy emotions, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw Ethan standing at the door. "Lord Governor, Lord Bishop." He greeted them, but there was a strange look on his face, as if he had just seen something unbelievable. Seeing Benjamin looking at him, Ethan stammered, "Sally, she is back." Back? Benjamin stood up abruptly, and the stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. "Where is she? How did she come back?" This is what I wanted to tell you," Ethan swallowed. "She was escorted back by a team of knights. I think it's the Lucifron family that." "Knights of the Lucifron family? I saw it. Titus and Knight Wellington both appeared in the square. I guess it's them." Benjamin waved his hand and was about to step out of the room to see Sally, but he heard the priest whisper, "They seem to be scouts." Benjamin, who had already taken 2 steps, did not hear it clearly. He turned his head and asked doubtfully, "What? I mean, they seem to be scouts of the Lucifron family." When Ethan's words fell, Benjamin's expression looked as if he had been punched. He exclaimed in surprise, "Say that again? Scouts? What happened?" Benjamin. Rubens, who was immersed in writing, was startled by his voice. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "No, nothing. A nun of the monastery has just returned here. I'll go check, Lord Governor." He replied respectfully, but the shock and astonishment on his face could not be concealed. His eyes met with Ethan's a few times, as though he had thought of something, but he dared not believe it. In the end, he strode out of the monastery, mumbling something indistinct under his breath. How is it possible? How is it possible? Just now, he was still thinking about the captain of the scout team, and now he heard Ethan said that a scout team of the Lucifron family escorted Sally back. Such a coincidence was indescribable, horrifying no matter how he thought about it. At this time, it was already dark, and a torch was lit in front of the monastery. The scene on the street was blurred in the dim environment, but when Benjamin walked out of the front hall of the church and looked forward, he suddenly widened his eyes. He swallowed and turned his head to ask Ethan, who was following him, "You said that this group of people are scouts?" The latter nodded with difficulty and replied in a dry voice, They did introduce themselves like this." "Have you seen scouts like this?" The corner of Benjamin's mouth twitched. He felt that today's chaotic assassination had messed up his mind, and now seeing this group of knights like a steel jungle, his brain short-circuited. 29 scouts were neatly equipped with armor, and the round shields in their hands were stained with blood, and there were even cuts made by swords and knives. Although their overall equipment was not as strong as the well-funded Templars, the smell of blood from the battlefield was overwhelming. When looking from afar, their formation was unbelievably neat, and their silent attitude made the atmosphere even more strange. Bishop Benjamin took a deep breath and walked closer, only to see the orderly troops begin to separate into 2 sides with a clatter. Under the orange light of the torches, the long swords at the waists of the knights gleamed coldly. When the horses moved, the sound of armor rubbing against each other brought with it an invisible pressure. Ethan was originally moving forward with the bishop, but at this time, because of the unusual movement of this group of knights, he instinctively stopped in his tracks. Then, Sally rode out from the middle of the team under the lead of Sodeler, and when they reached the gate of the monastery, the 2 dismounted one after another and slowly walked in front of Benjamin. "Greetings, Your Excellency." Sodeler greeted in a formal manner, but other than this sentence, he did not make any other movements, and the rest of the scouts sat motionless on their horses, with no intention of saluting the bishop at all. This clearly represented some kind of attitude. The priest's expression changed a little. He had never seen any noble's private soldiers in Hollier City that could be so arrogant. He opened his mouth to say something, but he was glared at by one of the fierce-looking veterans, and he subconsciously swallowed his words. After Sally stood still, she did not greet the bishop. Instead, she turned around and said softly to the scouts, "Thank you for escorting me." Then, she turned back to Benjamin and saluted, "Your Excellency, I'm back." Such an attitude ultimately made the atmosphere in front of the monastery awkward. Ever since Benjamin drove away Roddy, Sally had been a little cold to him, and after experiencing such an incident, Benjamin also understood that it was all his fault. He opened his mouth to say something, but after seeing Sally's blood-stained robe, his gaze froze and he sighed, "It's good that you're back." His voice was a little hoarse as he looked up, but he did not see the figure he expected. Beside him, Sally seemed to know what Benjamin was thinking, and said without any hesitation, "Today, Captain Roddy and his men saved me, but he thought that the church has a lot of misunderstandings about him, so he did not follow." To an outsider, this sentence was just a simple statement, but to Bishop Benjamin, it really felt like his old face was slapped a few times. The meaning of Sally was clear. Such a big incident, the one who turned the tide was Roddy, and the one who saved her from the hands of Francis was also Roddy. If he can do this, what have you guys been doing? Faced with such a rebuke, Benjamin really had nothing to say, and his heart was indeed filled with regret. But as a bishop, he was not a narrow-minded person. Although he was a little embarrassed, he did not feel any sense of humiliation or anger. After all, it was Roddy who saved his and Rubens's lives. He knew right from wrong. Fortunately, although Sally was angry, she was not mean. She also understood that it was because of the old man's help that she could enter the cloister and avoid Francis' assassination, so she said a few words in a gentle tone, giving Benjamin a way out. The bishop was naturally happy to answer, and immediately asked Ethan to bring Sally back to the cloister. After that, he stayed in front of the gate, facing the 29 scouts who had not left yet. Sodeler, who had not said a word, looked up and continued to remain silent, while the rest of the scouts still sat on their horses and looked down at the bishop. Benjamin wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he happened to see Sodeler's emotionless, machine-like expression. He suddenly felt that he should not say too much nonsense. After a moment of deliberation, he finally said in a low voice, "Say thank you to Captain Roddy for me. I owe him a favor." It was not easy for a bishop of virtue and prestige to keep such a low profile. Sodeler's face remained expressionless, and he only nodded in acknowledgement. Then, he said a few formal words of farewell, something along the lines of, "I'll pass the message to him." After turning around and mounting his horse, he and the scouts disappeared into the night almost instantly. Looking at their backs, Benjamin sighed softly and shook his head, as if he felt that some of his thoughts from a long time ago were a little ridiculous. With such subordinates, how can they be simple? When he stepped back, he thought of the blood splattered on Sally's robe again. He took a deep breath, smelling the faint smell of blood in the air, and said softly, "It seems that the battle of the Lucifron family is completely over." After the scouts left, the bishop also turned around and returned to the cloister. Silence once again enveloped the open space in front of the cloister, but from beginning to end, no one noticed a tall figure standing in the shadows not far away. Knight Wellington, who had a full beard on his face, did not seem to be interested in the bishop who was leaving. Instead, he looked at the group of scouts who were leaving in an orderly manner. He stroked his beard with interest and muttered to himself in a low voice, "They have some skills, this group of fellows." As the night deepened, a thin mist gradually appeared in the city. Less than 100 meters after the scouts left the cloister, Roddy's figure silently appeared in the team. He had actually been following the team all along, but just hid at the side when they were in the cloister. Speaking of which, Roddy had always been unhappy with Benjamin. Even after he cleared up the misunderstanding with Sally, it was difficult for him to get rid of his initial bad impression of the bishop. But now that it was resolved in this way, it could be said to be a happy ending for both sides. He had vented his anger, and Benjamin also admitted that he owed him a favor. This was already the result of doing good to Roddy. Thinking about how he could use this relationship with Benjamin in the future, he led the team on the wide road towards Cambay district. This operation was his own idea, so the ducal palace would not reimburse them for their food and lodging. "What's the next arrangement?" Sodeler asked while holding the reins. "I've stayed here for a while, so I know some cheap hotels. Let's go and have a comfortable rest first. We'll talk about tomorrow's matters tomorrow. Everyone did a good job today." Roddy touched the money pouch on his waist, but he also sighed. He felt that the money he earned from the Camilla beast scales was almost spent. He hurriedly asked, "How much money did we spend on the way here? How much tax did you pay?" The journey here was smooth, but the tax at Gigtown was a little higher. But after they heard that we were scouts from the Lucifron family, they still gave us a discount. Sodeler's words also resonated with Ruger, who was next to him. He continued, "Viscount Tranka is probably crazy poor. That kind of tax is very abnormal. If this goes on, the town will soon be deserted." Chapter 125. The moment this question was asked, all the scouts, including Sodeler, shook their heads. Roddy was stunned for a moment before he came to a realization. Wine was a beverage of the nobles and was not sold in the shop. Asking them would be a waste of time. "I don't know the price, but speaking of wine, Butler Anderson seems to have some news that this year's grape harvest isn't good. It seems like it's because of the heavy rain. I think Gigtown will be affected too." "That's useful news." Roddy nodded. The group had already entered the Cambay district. The tall buildings around them started to shrink and darken. The torches on the walls that were supposed to illuminate the area were nowhere to be seen. Fortunately, Carter was prepared and volunteered to walk in front with a torch. Following Roddy's instructions, they found a few cheap inns and ordered the scouts to settle the horses and prepare lodgings. Just as Roddy was about to enter the inn, 2 temple guards came from the corner of the street with torches in their hands. Roddy turned his head suspiciously. He was curious as to why he would see people from the Rose Cross here. His keen sense of the environment allowed him to quickly come to a conclusion from their conversation. "Where did they go?" "It should be that way. There's a fork in the road. Split up." It seemed like they were here to track down the escaped cultists. Roddy looked at the 2 temple guards that were slowly walking away. Suddenly, a piece of information popped up in his mind. In his memory, the 3rd step of The Fall of Priestess Nilda was to search for clues in a hidden passageway in the city. The original purpose of this passageway seemed to be for the Pit Viper Cross to evacuate. The Fall of Priestess Nilda was a very long mission line. The first person to be investigated was Nilda himself. As the investigation deepened, he would discover that he was involved with Pit Viper Cross. After more than 10 steps, he would find out that it even involved the undead. Roddy did not mention these miscellaneous matters for now. The only thing he was interested in was that the passageway was a way to make money. As the people of Pit Viper Cross were in a hurry to build the passageway was basically filled with all sorts of stone and dirt. Therefore, the players who came here to investigate at the beginning of the mission chain would find a lot of crystal fragments scattered in the passageway. This was the mission reward for this step. Although they were only low-level processing materials, they were precious because they were rare. When the average level was not high, these things could be sold for a lot of money. Thinking of the predicament of being short of money and about to go bankrupt, Roddy almost immediately made up his mind to do it. Therefore, after confirming that his men had filled up the 2 inns, Roddy immediately called for Ruger and Sodeler. Take a few cloth bags and find a digging tool. Pickaxes are the best. Bring a torch and come with me. After giving the simple orders, Roddy also rummaged through a few bags. Because he was worried that they would encounter the escaped heretics, he also reminded them, "Oh right, don't forget to bring weapons. We might encounter a battle." "What are we going to do?" "Earn some extra money." "Extra money?" I suddenly thought of a place that might have valuable things. Let's take advantage of the darkness to fish for some money. I don't think there will be any later. Roddy and Ruger walked in front while Carter and Sodeler followed behind. The three of them took a total of 6 or 7 big bags. Ruger borrowed a shovel from the innkeeper, Sodeler held a torch, and Roddy carried a short bow and a machete. They walked towards the mission location according to their impression. The path along the way was pitch black, and they encountered 2 temple guards along the way. One of them even asked if they had seen any heretic. Naturally, the 3 of them shook their heads. After walking for 5 or 6 minutes, the group chatted as they came to an abandoned residential area closest to the city wall in Cambay district. Up until this point, they did not see any heretic. The 3 of them relaxed and chatted casually. "Ruger, what do you want to do in the future? Cavalry captain? Or infantry? Fighting on horseback is not a problem, but leading a team, I don't think I can lead many people. This small scout team is almost my limit." "Well, I think I understand what you mean. A suitable team, to carry out special missions or something." Roddy chatted with them about their future career plans. He thought about what kind of job advancement would be suitable for these guys. For a veteran like Ruger, who was stronger than other soldiers, being on the front lines of battle was what he was most willing to do. It was better to let him herd sheep than to stand in the back of the battlefield and command. Roddy gradually had some ideas about this characteristic. "What about Sodeler? Have you encountered any problems recently?" "Not many. The main thing is that I feel my swordsmanship has reached some kind of bottleneck, and it's very difficult to improve." He continued bluntly, "The people in the scout team are not as strong as me. If I were to spar with you, your path is really not suitable for practice." This was the truth. Although Roddy had the attribute advantage, and could crush Sodeler, if he, a berserker, were to spar with Sodeler, the wear and tear of his weapon would definitely be a big problem. "Well, I will think about this. We're here, let's get down to business first." Roddy stopped and identified the surrounding buildings. As it was year 588, some of the details were not the same as in year 590. He frowned and thought for a moment. Finally, he confirmed the room with the secret passage and walked towards it. Sodeler held a torch in his left hand and a longsword in his right. Ruger stood at the back of the team and turned to look at the shadow of the building behind him. Just as they reached the door of the house, Roddy suddenly stopped. Wait, the improved sense of smell brought by environmental acuity allowed him to smell a faint smell of blood. This immediately made him vigilant. Sodeler also noticed the almost indistinguishable footprints not far from the door. Someone has been here. Judging from the traces, it should be within today. He bent down and wiped the dirt with his hand. The traces have changed here. Looks like he's trying to cover up. No, this isn't covering up. This person crawled in. Although Roddy could also identify traces, he couldn't deduce something so detailed. Hearing Sodeler's words, he frowned and slowly kicked open the wooden door with a puzzled look on his face. The arrows that were already knocked on the arrow stand were aimed forward, ready to kill any target that jumped out at any time. His ears were also listening to all the movements in the surroundings. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that if someone had entered the room, they would have already escaped through the secret passage. They wouldn't be waiting here to ambush someone. Opening the surrounding status bar, Roddy quickly found the secret passage behind the fireplace. But when he got closer, the smell of blood in the air suddenly became stronger. Everyone had a strange expression on their faces. Roddy thought for a moment and opened the surrounding status bar. He picked up the torch and scimitar and was the first to walk down. Ruger, stand guard at the door and close the door. Sodeler, follow me. After saying that, he walked down the narrow ramp that he couldn't even straighten his back. At this time, it was only 2 minutes since Akasha fell into the secret passage. It could even be said that as soon as her front foot rolled down, Roddy pushed open the door outside. So Roddy only took a few steps before he saw Akasha lying in a pool of blood. What's going on? Because he could directly see the health bar displayed above the surrounding mission, he immediately knew that Akasha did not have any ability to resist. Because her health bar showed that she only had 5% left and a heavily injured status, it meant that she was on the verge of death. This level is a little familiar. Roddy used the torch to illuminate Akasha's body. The first thing he saw was her right arm that was fractured at a strange angle, and then a large amount of blood that was almost completely soaked through her back. Internal injury? What's going on? Akasha was lying on the ground, so it took some effort for Roddy to turn her face that was covered in dust. He took a closer look and immediately remembered that he had seen this woman before. It was at the entrance of the Pig's Head bar. This extremely high-ranking woman seemed to be the leader of a few heretics. When the assassination happened today, she seemed to be at the scene. Roddy was far away and did not hear what she said to Bishop Rubens. So, at this time, he immediately thought that Akasha was a heretic who failed to escape. Who's there? Behind him, Sodeler frowned. He also felt that it was a little strange for a half-dead woman to appear in such a place. He even drew his sword. In his field of vision, Roddy was holding a woman with an unusually seductive figure. Because of the light, Akasha's pale cheeks made her look even more alluring. No matter how one looked at her, she was an exquisite beauty. But when Roddy held her face, he casually let go as if he was throwing away a piece of trash. However, when Roddy held the beauty's face in his hand and looked at her, he let go of her as if he was throwing away rubbish. Akasha's face fell to the ground. The sound and scene made Sodeler's mouth twitch and his eyebrows twitch. When he looked up, he found that Roddy did not seem to be interested in her at all. As he walked, he said, "She's just a heretic. Seriously injured and waiting to die. Let's not care about her. When she dies, we can just drag her corpse to the monastery." Naturally, Sodeler did not understand what Roddy meant when he said, "I guess I can exchange it for some reputation points." After that, Roddy treated Akasha like a block of wood and walked past her. He did not forget to look back and motioned for Sodeler to follow him. "This way, the thing we are looking for is inside. Hold the bag properly. Right, throw me that shovel." Sodeler's eyebrows twitched as he looked at the woman who was about to die. In his heart, he felt that Roddy's way of thinking was a little strange. In any case, she was a human. How could he just throw her aside like an object? In fact, Roddy was not interested in the life or death of such a high-ranking heretic. The stories of Mr. Dongwa and the wolf and the farmer and the serpent were not just to scare people. He was not interested in saving and reforming a lunatic from the Viper Cross. At that moment, the fact that he did not immediately stab him with a knife was already showing that he still had some mercy and compassion in his modern character. Sodeler looked at the dying Akasha and raised the torch. Being cautious, he finally asked, "Do you want to search her?" "You can search now. Look at the torch, I'll search here first." Roddy lowered his head to look for traces of crystals on the ground. He had the look of a money grubber, or rather, an otaku who lived a lonely life. He had no interest in Akasha, who was lying on the ground beside him. The river flows east, the stars in the sky join the Big Dipper. There really is one. Chapter 126. On the other side, Sodeler, who had found a blood-stained letter on Akasha's body, was reading the words with the help of a torch. The more he read, the more he felt that something was wrong. Finally, he said, Roddy, there's a letter on her. The signature seems to be Viceroy Rubens. Who signs who? What does that have to do with me? Wait, Rubens? It looks like she's from Rose Cross and Viper Cross. No way. Could she be a spy? F***CK. Roddy threw down the cloth bag in his hand and rushed over. He scanned the contents of the letter and confirmed that the woman was indeed a spy. He suddenly slapped his head. Damn it, I mistook her for a reactionary. Sodeler was a little stunned. He didn't understand why Roddy was so distressed. His relationship with Rose Cross wasn't very good, was it? With this thought in mind, he asked hesitantly, should I save her? Nonsense. Hurry up. Roddy anxiously raised his hand and grabbed it. He didn't care if he touched Akasha's breasts or waist. He tore open her clothes and began to check the wound. He didn't forget to mumble, how many reputation points can I get if I save her? Because they didn't bring any bandages, Roddy and Sodeler could only take off their coats and tear it open to bandage Akasha's wound. The two were shocked by the bloody scene on her back. Fortunately, the thin bra didn't cover too much of the wound, so Roddy didn't tear it off. The two men surrounded the unconscious Akasha and busied themselves outside the secret passage. Ruger, who was on guard, felt a little strange because he heard the sound of clothes being torn. Although he was puzzled, he didn't leave his post. After waiting for more than 10 minutes, he heard the sound of Sodeler and Roddy crawling out of the secret passage. When he walked over to take a look, he was stunned. Sodeler, who was walking in front, was holding a torch while Roddy, who was behind him, was carrying a woman with loose hair. That figure, that appearance, thinking back to the sound of ripping clothes, Lu Gu suddenly thought of a scene that was not suitable for children. He stammered, This, Captain, is this alive? We almost died. Let's go. We'll come back later. I was wondering why the two of you stayed here for so long. Phew, it's good that it's not an ex-zombie. Nonsense, we're going to, Roddy replied as he walked. Suddenly, he felt something was wrong with the sentence he just heard. He immediately kicked Lu Ji's butt. F***CK. What the F***CK are you thinking? How did it become a ******* in his eyes when he saved her? Sodeler, who was beside him, had a strange expression on his face. He looked like he was suffering from internal injuries from holding back his laughter. He walked in front without saying a word. In the end, he was also kicked in the butt by Roddy. Be serious, all of you. After saying this, Roddy panted. The secret passage was too narrow. It was really difficult to carry a person out, so he complained, She doesn't seem to have much flesh, but it's really heavy. Captain, if you can't do it, let me do it, Lu Gu hurriedly volunteered, but was kicked away by Roddy. Why do you sound like you're in a hurry to gang rape her? Ha 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 ha, Sodeler finally couldn't hold back his laughter. Then, the three men carried the Viper Cross priest back to the hotel, talking nonsense. At the same time, the ducal palace of Lucifron seemed to be brightly lit. The reception hall, which had not been used for a long time, had become unusually quiet in the past few years. Because Francis never received guests here, the fireplace had not been lit for a long time. But now, the fireplace was burning, and the red glow of the charcoal filled the room with warmth. The servants of the ducal palace were walking around the room. Ever since Butler Alpha disappeared, the news of the awakening of the Dukes of Angmar had brought unimaginable vitality to the originally lifeless mansion. It was hard to imagine that a single person could change the atmosphere of the entire mansion. No matter how they were in the past, at this time, the busy servants were all filled with joy. The joy in their hearts was not hidden at all. The changes to Gordon Manor are here. The tax will be deducted by 20%. If he doesn't pay, then do as you see fit. Dismiss this team. There's no point in their existence. Send this invitation directly to Count Tata. I think it'll be about time for him to get here. We'll go tomorrow morning. The Dukes of Angmar sat in front of the armrest and casually spoke to the clerks and servants as if they were having a casual chat. His words were clear, and even the names of people and places were not wrong. This situation meant that the old Duke had fully recovered. Although his body was still weak due to long-term malnutrition, after a week of rest and a full meal, Angmar's body was recovering at an extremely fast speed. At this time, he could walk around the mansion at will, not to mention issuing dozens of government orders. He sat in the armchair and flipped through the parchment in his hand. It was a detailed record of the territory's tax collection and the city's various actions over the years. The old man looked at it and shook his head. Finally, when he put down the parchment, he sighed. Stupid. He was lamenting what Francis had done in the past. All right, that's all for today. Go and rest. He raised his hand, and the servant immediately came over to receive the parchment. Then, he brought in the milk tea for the night. Just as he poured a cup, he heard steady footsteps coming from outside the door. Lord Duke. Knight Titus stood at the door and greeted them. He, Knight Wellington, and the Duke had been through life and death with each other. In the past, he would not use too many formalities. At this time, Ankama also expected him to come back. He raised his hand and said, Come, come, come. Pour a cup of tea. It's still cold outside. The knight strode over. Because of his astonishing height, the maid who served him tea looked even more petite. The delicate teacup in his hand was as small as a toy. Titus was not good at talking. He raised his cup to the Duke as if he was drinking wine, and then gulped down the hot milk tea in one gulp. He savored the taste, but his expression did not change at all. You're still the same. It's been a few years, and you still haven't found a suitable woman to marry? This topic. Sigh. Titus shook his head and took the second cup of milk tea from the maid. As usual, he drank it in one gulp and wiped his mouth. It's still easier to fight a war. Women. I really can't understand what's going on in their heads. No matter how many times I say it, it's still the same. Angmar seemed to recall some stories in the past. He smiled and then changed the topic. Then let's talk about what happened today. I've roughly heard the process from someone, but when it comes to fighting a war, you're the one who understood it better. Dukes of Angmar crossed his fingers and held his chin. His eyes flickered slightly. I heard that the war was reversed because of an arrow? To some extent it is true. Titus, who was an honest man, basically did not speak on most topics. Only when the topic involved war would he be interested in saying a few more words. That heretic was very tricky. Although he was already dead when I arrived, I could see that he almost succeeded. After that, I specifically went to check on the corpse. The arrow hit the back of his heart. It was not blocked by the shield, and it had an explosive effect. The closest suitable shooting point was about 40 meters away, but I think the real location was 60 meters away. Dukes of Angmar listened quietly. In his mind, he gradually constructed the scene that happened today in the city square. At a certain moment, he suddenly asked, Where's the arrow? It was taken by the bishop. But later on, I found more than one arrow on the ground. At least 7 heretics nearby were directly shot to death. Every one of them was killed with one arrow. At this point, Titus's expression changed slightly, revealing a somewhat fanatical expression. Almost a 100% accuracy and kill rate. This guy is really not a small fry. Especially when he directly shot another mage. Although I don't know who sent this guy, but he's really powerful. It's not easy to hear the word powerful come out of your mouth. Dukes of Angmar raised his eyebrows. He seemed to be a little surprised by his evaluation. There are a lot of powerful people, but not many are powerful. I think people who can grasp this kind of timing are really powerful. The battle lasted for almost an hour. It was neither too early nor too late. That one arrow played a key role, and the subsequent attack directly destroyed the enemy's morale. This kind of person is not powerful in terms of strength, but in his brain. Titus pointed to his head. People who can use their brain to fight, I really admit that they are powerful. These words were indeed agreed by Dukes of Angmar. He nodded, and then he sensed something and turned his head to look outside the door. The figure of Knight Wellington was standing there. The maid who was pouring tea was startled by the knight, because she did not even notice when he appeared. I'm old after all. My reaction is a lot slower than before. Angmar stretched out his hand and signaled for him to come in. Although the latter was about the same size as Titus, he did not make any sound when he walked. This was related to the characteristics of his advanced profession, Ghost Knight. From a certain point of view, Wellington was usually like a thief or assassin. He did not look like a knight wearing plate armor at all. As a right-hand man of the Dukes of Angmar, his strength was naturally unquestionable. Today in the city square, Titus galloped freely, but he did not show up at all. Because from the beginning to the end, Wellington was only paying attention to Sally's movements. From the beginning when she was attacked by Francis, this knight had been watching silently from afar. Until Sally directly hacked Francis to death outside the city, he did not show up even once. It was not until he confirmed that Sally had returned to the cloister that he ended his mission for the day and returned to the ducal palace. Obviously, until now, no one else knew about Francis' death, not even the Dukes of Angmar. So when Wellington walked over, the old duke could not help but look at him with a questioning look, and quietly waited for the answer. Wellington stood in front of the duke, then knelt down on one knee and whispered, "Miss Sally has safely returned to the cloister." Chapter 127. After hearing Knight Wellington's words, the Dukes of Angmar, who had always been strong since he woke up, was stunned for a moment. Then he lowered his eyes slightly and slowly exhaled. His voice was slightly hoarse as he asked, "So, he's dead?" In the years when they fought side by side, the Dukes of Angmar had actually asked similar questions no less than 10 times. The people he asked had also changed a lot. Those knights who had fought together with him had passed away one by one. Every time someone died, the Dukes of Angmar would say such words, but it was different this time, because the one who died was his only son, Francis Ford. Because the one who died was his only son, Francis Fruxafron. No matter how accustomed he was to death, when faced with such news, the old duke's mood was complicated and indescribable. He stretched out his hand and gently pinched the bridge of his nose. His wrinkled face slightly trembled. When he looked up, he could vaguely see Titus and Wellington when they were young. But when his vision became clear, he could see the traces left by time on these two young knights. Everything was changing. At the same time, he also remembered the figure of the little boy who used to be full of smiles and liked to ask questions. But the doubts in his heart also followed. During the years when he was sick, what kind of path did he take that led to this irreversible result? Angmar, whose face seemed to have aged a few years in an instant, suddenly sighed. But other than that, he did not reveal any other emotions. Titus, who was at the side, no longer talked and laughed. Knight Wellington got up and sat at the side. After the maid consciously left, he began to narrate what he saw in a soft voice. This process did not take long, but the Dukes of Angmar also asked in detail for a full hour. When he heard that Sally personally chopped Francis into meat paste, Duke, who had been receiving all the information, calmly shook his head and said softly, "She would not do that. Maybe it has something to do with another person." Wellington thought for a moment and continued softly, "I want to say, that scout captain, ***************** Time passed slowly. When it was almost midnight, Akasha, who was in a room in a cheap hotel in Cambay district, finally woke up. Her eyelids twitched, and the sharp pain from her right arm gradually brought her back to consciousness. Akasha's hearing was the first to return to normal. She wanted to open her eyes, but her eyelids were still too heavy to lift, and her body was in extreme pain. After a long time, she realized that she was lying on a soft bed. Her chest was a little stuffy, and her throat was very dry, but these feelings couldn't compare to the waves of pain coming from her arm. The pain didn't matter, but what terrified Akasha the most was that she could feel a pair of hands touching her arm back and forth, and there were intermittent sounds of conversation in her ears. You need to find a good splint to fix the fracture. You know this, right? There was a voice that sounded very casual. It seemed to be the leader, with a tone that said, "I'll talk, you listen." I remember a doctor saying that I only have a general understanding of bone problems. Her case is more complicated, so I'm not sure. The young man who answered sounded a little cautious. Ruger, what do you think? Me? I think it's fine to just straighten it out and bandage it. This voice was a little hoarse, and he should be over 30 years old. If your fracture is like this, you can forget about holding a sword for the rest of your life if I just casually bandage it. There were a total of 3 people, and they seemed to be using her as a teaching material. Akasha felt like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. She felt very embarrassed, but her mind was muddled. She still couldn't remember why she was here. She wanted to move, but she couldn't muster any strength at all. She's lucky the bone didn't pierce through the skin, or it would be troublesome if it was infected. What do you mean infected? You won't understand even if I tell you. Anyway, remember, if there's a wound on your body in the future, wash it first. Akasha listened in a daze, and gradually remembered why she was injured. The secret passage, the wound on her back, was she caught by them from the secret passage? She couldn't think of any other possibilities. She first thought that these people were from the Rose Cross, but then she heard something that made her stunned. They said they would send her to the monastery today, but we just went to their place last night to pretend to be naked. It's not appropriate to go there now. We can send her tomorrow. Those psychics should be able to treat her with divine spells. Now we just need to make sure the wound is clean. As the man spoke, he reached out to wipe her back with a towel. Akasha's heart was immediately filled with incomparable shame and indignation. It's over. My back has been seen by him. Okay, now put the splint on. Sodeler, help me hold her hand. Yes, Ruger, put the splint on. It's crooked, too crooked. Straighten it. Okay, bandage. Damn it, Sodeler, the thing on your buttocks. Akasha couldn't hear the rest of the words at all, because the sharp pain in her arm had made her faint again. When she woke up again, Akasha felt as if her body was buried in the soil and she couldn't move. Her eyelids moved slightly, and she finally opened a slit on the bed. What entered her eyes was a simple bedside table under the dim candlelight. There was a large cobweb in the corner. It was obvious that no one cleaned this place. There was a strong smell of blood, but also a faint smell of herbs. Her head was cushioned by a pillow, and an old smell assaulted her face. This should be a cheap hotel. Her consciousness recovered bit by bit, and the scene of the assassination flashed before her eyes. Finally, it stopped at the secret passage. No matter what, I was still saved. Although she thought so, Akasha didn't feel much joy, because she quickly realized that she was about to face a crisis. These few strangers who saved her seemed to want to hand her over to the monastery, and when she thought of the governor who directly ordered to arrest and even attack her, her heart was filled with many complicated emotions. Regret? No, she finally got rid of the Viper Cross. Anger? Very angry. Rubens's attack made the anger in Akasha's heart feel like it was burning. But when she thought of revenge, her heart was immediately shrouded by a sense of helplessness. The identity of a governor was like a mountain to Akasha. She had nothing now, and she had neither power nor strength. Even if she looked for him, she was afraid that she would be killed in minutes. There was some reluctance in her heart, but in the end, she still recognized the reality. No matter what, finding a stable place to live was the first thing she needed to do. Akasha tried to move her fingers, and was pleasantly surprised to find that because of the splint, she could now move her fingers slightly. This meant that she could almost cast a weak healing spell. But just as she was about to cast the spell, the door was gently pushed open. "It's been a busy day, Rouge. Ask a few people to pack those stones. We'll be relying on them for our meals." "Captain, these things are so valuable." "That's not for you to worry about. I'll think of a way to earn money. Go back to sleep first. Don't forget to arrange for someone to keep watch." "It's those 3 people again." Akasha thought of the treatment before she fainted and could not help but feel a little hot. I really don't know if he took the opportunity to do something else. She had no way to confirm what had happened to her. In short, her body was wrapped in bandages like a mummy. The side effects of excessive blood loss were still lingering. The conversation of the few people beside her continued. It sounded like the guy called Rouge had gone back to rest, while the guy called Sodeler and the captain stayed here. The team's condition is not bad. I can see that they didn't slack off during training. Everything is going according to plan. Oh yes, on the 12th, a group of horses came to Norland Village, and we took care of them. I reckon that no one will dare to rob food there for a few years. Was anyone injured? Minor injuries. They're almost healed. But there were some losses in today's battle. Although they weren't seriously injured, they still need to rest for a while. This was unavoidable. The captain sighed and then let out a sigh of relief. No matter what, this matter is finally over. We can take a break. There was a moment of silence. Akasha silently prayed for them to leave quickly, but then she found that they seemed to be talking more and more enthusiastically. "Captain Roddy, actually, I've always had a question." After hearing this, Akasha learned that the captain's name was Roddy. Since we arrived at Norland Village, when I think about what we've done, I feel that it's incredible. I've always wanted to ask, what kind of belief supported you to do so many things? Belief? Roddy was also a little bored after the battle. He felt that it was okay to talk about ideals with Sodeler at this time. Belief. I can't really call it that. In fact, it should be called a certain state. State. Yes, a state. Roddy thought for a moment and continued. For example, what is the state of a farmer? Sodeler was a little confused, but he did not speak to interrupt him. Farming every day, thinking about the harvest every day, and basically knowing nothing else. This state is numb and ignorant because farmers basically don't know things that they can't touch. What they have to do is nothing more than farming and paying the rent. After a pause, Roddy's words not only attracted Sodeler's attention, but also made Akasha frown and listen attentively. Perhaps his state will be like this for the rest of his life, but if one day he starts to learn continuously, accumulating a lot of knowledge and knowing a lot of new things, what will happen? Sodeler frowned and thought for a moment. Perhaps he will use this knowledge somewhere, such as becoming a noble instead of farming? Yes, his state at this time is like a germinating seed that has begun to grow, because his state wants to improve. Roddy paused for a moment, seemingly trying to organize his words. After a long time, he said, "Actually, people are like this. The more you see and understand, the more complicated your condition becomes. The more things you want to do, the more things you want to do. I dragged you to kill those bastards in the Orc Kingdom to my heart's content, and killed their pillar of support, the witch doctor. Why did I do that? Actually, my state at that time was essentially fear. Afraid of them? No, I actually wasn't afraid of facing them. What I was afraid of was the influence these fellows could cause in the future on the land of the Orc Kingdom. That was what I was afraid of, and this state of fear supported me to lead you out of that grassland." After Roddy said this, Sodeler frowned and fell into deep thought. On the other side, Akasha, who was lying on the bed, was so shocked by these words that she couldn't speak, and even opened her small mouth involuntarily. Chapter 128. For Akasha, who had always lived in the southern part of the kingdom, orcs had always been a symbol of savagery and greed. They were bloodthirsty and warlike. They even ate people alive. They were powerful and barbaric. Humans were completely weak against the orcs. If they didn't have good weapons, it would be impossible to defeat them. But these two guys in front of her, who she didn't know, actually killed their way into the orc kingdom. Akasha felt her head was in a mess. She even wondered if she was hallucinating. While she was in a daze, the conversation between Roddy and Sodalar continued. Such a big conflict broke out between Rose Cross and Viper Cross. I could have completely stayed out of it, but I still decided to ask you guys to participate. Speaking of which, my current state is actually similar to when I went to the Orc Kingdom. Sodalar raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion, "You're afraid of Francis?" Roddy waved his hand. "Remember when I went to Fenk's village and asked you to evacuate the villagers? Why did Sally agree so easily? Because she also knew that the reason why the orcs attacked the village was because of Francis. He is a traitor. He will do such things now and in the future. So we must kill him." At this point, the atmosphere became a little quiet. In short, I feel that whether or not we can achieve anything depends on the person's current state. For example, I finally made some extra money now. I'm one step closer to cultivating the kingdom's first cavalry regiment. I'm in a good mood, and I'm motivated to do whatever I want. This was a joking tone. Roddy had once mentioned the idea of a knight regiment, but Sodalar was, after all, a normal person. He never thought that his group of scouts could become the kingdom's first cavalry regiment. He laughed and said that these things were too nonsensical. Akasha, who was eavesdropping at the side, frowned. It seemed that they did not just go to the Orc Kingdom to kill. Could it be that they also killed a count? Count Francis? Isn't that the eldest son of Duke Lucifron? If it was someone else who said this, Akasha would definitely not believe it. But listening to their tone, it was indeed serious. If this kind of thing was specially used to deceive people, it would be fine. But it just so happened that the two of them mentioned it inadvertently. As a result, Akasha's heart was bewildered. Perhaps it was true? With such a huge incident happening today, the Rose Cross will probably have to take a break. Sodalar changed the topic to the central character of today's incident. In my impression, these religions are very gentle. I didn't expect them to cause such a big commotion this time. A tall tree attracts the wind. Religion, gathering resources and brainwashing people are much more efficient than the nobles. The Viper Cross is the same, just that they are a little more overboard. Roddy took a sip of water and said casually as he leaned against the back of the chair, "A lot of things look good on the surface, but they're actually filthy. I'm not going to casually talk about the Rose Cross, but the Viper Cross is definitely a bottomless pit. You know about them?" "I know a little. That religion looks peaceful on the outside, but it's very extreme on the inside. Those who don't know would think it's some kind of good religion at first, but after entering, you'll find that it's an abyss of suffering. When you find that you've already become a thug or a terrorist, there's no way to escape. If you ask me, the sooner this religion disappears, the sooner the kingdom will benefit." The two of them usually chatted in such a tone. Today, they were a little excited after the battle and unknowingly chatted a lot. Sodalar was often curious about Roddy's novel but profound views, but it wasn't to the extent of completely absorbing them or believing them. After all, he was a person who could think, and there were some things that could not be backed up by word. For example, the Viper Cross was ruthless and tyrannical, and he wouldn't believe it without evidence. But it didn't matter if he didn't believe it. Akasha's heart was in turmoil because of it. What kind of leader is this person? How can he have such a thorough understanding of the Viper Cross? If the previous words only made Akasha bewildered, then what Roddy said now was something that she completely agreed with. As a high-level priest of light, the reason why Akasha was reduced to following the Viper Cross to engage in terrorist activities was because of the oppressive rule within the religion. punishment, threats, and countless believers had embarked on a path of no return. Akasha, who had regained her senses, had a change in her perception of Roddy. At least the feeling of being understood by someone made her original bad feelings disappear a lot, and she began to guess Roddy's identity. Was he the captain of a cavalry regiment, or a retainer of a great noble, or a captain of a private army? Countless possibilities appeared in her mind, but she was completely stunned by Roddy's words. "All right, after this matter is over, Sally will record it down for us. When there's a chance, we don't have to be a scout in the village anymore. Damn it, we've already slaughtered almost all the orcs, what's the point of patrolling?" He grumbled in boredom, but Akasha swallowed hard. Scouts, they were actually scouts. Wasn't this the lowest rank in the army? It was even the epitome of cannon fodder. I heard that the group of heathens in the square today were quite powerful. Were there any heathens who knew magic? Sodeler asked about the battle in the square today. 4 or 5 of them knew magic. The most powerful one was the Shadow Priest. If I met him face to face, I would only be waiting for death. But at that time, he was continuously casting spells to deal with the 2 old priests, and I took the opportunity to kill him. That explosive arrow was really useful. I killed him in 1 shot. Now that you mention it, I also think that the equipment of the Rose Cross is really good. When we were fighting with that group of mercenaries this afternoon, I could clearly feel that those guys. The 2 began to talk about the weapons in the Rose Cross armory. On the other side, Akasha, who was lying on the bed, felt a little suffocated. The person who killed Gallop with 1 shot was actually him. She originally thought that she was saved by a few insignificant people, but she never thought that these people were so cruel that they could not be any more cruel. One moment they killed the Count, the next they cut down the witch doctor. Even the bard stories were not as ridiculous as this. Oh right, I've been pretending to be a bard for some time now. When I have nothing to do, I'll make a story about our experience fighting the orcs. I didn't expect it to be so King popular. Hearing this, Akasha felt her vision blacking out and almost fainted again. The intermittent conversation gradually weakened. It was obvious that after a busy day, Roddy and Sodeler were starving. They got up and prepared to eat something. "Do we still need someone to watch over this place?" "Her? She's so heavily injured, just find someone to guard the door." The 2 chatted as they walked out of the room. When the wooden door closed with a click, Akasha felt that her mind was filled with a mess of complicated thoughts. She never thought that a scout, a low-level soldier who was neglected by others, could achieve such an exaggerated feat, especially when Roddy was able to kill Gallop. Such a fact had completely frightened her. But after these emotions gradually calmed down, Akasha's heart was filled with a little loneliness and sadness. Seeing others fight for their goals and achieve results, while she was down and out and even heavily injured, this feeling of disparity made Akasha very uncomfortable. Although she did not completely agree with Roddy's statement about his state, she felt that it made sense. For Akasha herself, she had always been resigned to adversity, which was why she ended up like this. Thinking about it carefully, she had never tried her best to fight for any goal. Even when she wrote that letter to Rubens, she hesitated and thought about it. At the end of the day, her current confusion caused her to have no goal at all. All her actions were based on her instinct to seek good fortune and avoid disaster. In the past, Akasha had always avoided thinking about the reason why she ended up like this. But at this moment, Roddy's words finally made her realize her biggest flaw: confusion, helplessness, fear, and finally, the first unusually strong wish that she had in a long time gradually rose in her mind. Escape from this place. Leave this place, no longer be controlled and used by religion, no longer have to deal with these troublesome people and things, far away from all troubles, far away from everything. This thought was like a seed that was rooted in the bottom of her heart. It quickly sprouted, and Akasha immediately put it into action. After she could barely move her fingers, she silently chanted the low-level recovery prayer. A soft golden light enveloped her body and slowly healed the wounds on her body. The pain gradually subsided, and the fracture on her arm was slightly itchy. But because the level of the divine spell was not high, such a serious injury did not heal immediately. But after 2 or 3 consecutive low-level divine spells, the wound on her back was basically healed. When her arm could more or less move, she immediately released high-level recovery, and her body immediately recovered. This was the strength of the Light Priest, and the player's nickname of Healer was not just for show. As long as she was not killed, she could always quickly recover. But because she had lost too much blood, Akasha's head was still a little dizzy. Footsteps came from outside the door. Akasha, who was just about to get up, immediately lay back down. The intermittent conversation indicated that it was the scout who came to replace her. After the scout entered the room, he sat on the chair by the door, and then everything returned to silence. After 10 minutes, Akasha, who did not dare to move, slowly turned her face. She looked around, and after confirming that the scout was sitting there with fatigue, she softly chanted a prayer. The function of divine spell, Pacify, was to calm people's extreme emotions, such as excitement or anger, and when it was used on ordinary people, it had the effect of hypnosis. Although Akasha never had a decisive temperament, she had never neglected the study of divine spells. Perhaps this was the only thing that she was willing to spend time on. For example, the fact that divine spell, Pacify, could hypnotize people was something that ordinary mages did not know. Chapter 129. When Akasha walked out of the room on the second floor, the guard on duty had his back facing her. With the help of the divine spell, she continued to walk down the stairs. When she looked up at the sky outside, Akasha realized that it was already past midnight, so the entire first floor of the hotel was empty. Since she had made up her mind, Akasha wanted to leave immediately. But when she passed by the bar, the few sausages and bread on the counter made her stop. Her stomach growled and she swallowed her saliva. She had never stolen anything in her life, so she felt an unspeakable sense of guilt. But when she thought of her goal, she bit her lip and looked up at the second floor. She took a deep breath and hugged the bread and sausages into her arms. She also put on a cloak on the chair, pushed open the door, and ran out, but after running for 2 or 3 steps, Akasha suddenly turned back and ran to the kitchen to pick up a boning knife. After carving a few words on the bar, she heaved a sigh of relief and turned to push open the door. Without looking back, she hurriedly disappeared into the night. The inn remained quiet until 3 hours later, when the second shift of guards came to take over the night shift. They finally noticed something was wrong. What? She ran away? Roddy, who had finally had a good night's sleep, was stunned when he was woken up. He looked at Ruger with bloodshot eyes and asked in surprise, "How did she run away? Is anyone hurt?" "No, the guards are all asleep," Ruger explained as he brought Roddy to the first floor of the hotel. "I don't know why, but she left this behind." "What?" Roddy's brain was still muddled. He had just woken up and his thoughts were unclear. When he saw Ruger pointing at the counter, he went over to take a look. His expression suddenly became extremely shocked. This. What the F***ck? What do you mean?" Sodeler, who had also been woken up by the noise, came down the stairs in his crooked jacket. He was dumbfounded when he saw the handwriting on the bar counter. A scout came over and read the sentence on it in a low voice. "I'm really sorry, I need to borrow your cloak and food. If there's a chance, I'll pay you back." The words carved on the tip of the knife were a little messy, but Roddy and the others looked at each other. Have you ever seen someone write a letter of apology after stealing? No, never seen him before. At this time, Carter ran over with sleepy eyes and asked with a confused face, Who ran away? Do we need to chase after them? Roddy opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but after pondering for a long time, he waved his hand and said, forget it, forget it. He's probably long gone. There's no point in chasing him. He was surprised and amused at the same time. Why did he save such a clown when he was trying to save a person? If she wanted to run, then so be it. She just took something and still said that she wanted to return the money. I really don't know how to describe this woman. Now that he thought about it, Roddy realized that he still didn't know what this woman's name was. But that wasn't important. After all, it was just a little less reputation. He really didn't lose anything else. He sat at the counter and casually took a cup of ale to quench his thirst. After drinking it, he couldn't figure out why the other party would run away. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, why did she run away? It's not like I'm going to eat you, she probably thinks we're the bad guys? Beside him, Luga touched his nose and muttered, Captain, you tore her clothes and so on, get lost. That's for healing. Roddy's face was a little red. At this time, he also realized that he seemed to have not taken her seriously. He immediately waved his hand and chased her away. Go back to sleep, go back to sleep. Anyway, that crystal fragment is in our hands. Don't worry about anything else. If I have the chance to meet her, I really have to ask her. Isn't it just taking off her clothes and bandaging her? With a yawn, Roddy rolled back to his bed and continued to sleep. Achoo! A few kilometers away, Akasha, who had already quietly left Hollier City, sneezed. She immediately covered her mouth and cautiously looked at the forest in the darkness where the cold wind blew. Her voluptuous body was wrapped in a large cloak. Her white fingers took out a sausage from her pocket. She hesitated for a moment, then began to eat it in small bites. If I continue down this road, there should be a town. Although her memory was good, Akasha was not familiar with the Efta territory. At this time, she only knew that if she followed the main road to the north, she would be far away from those religious forces. But if she had any specific plans, it would be to find a town and live in seclusion. She was curious and had inexplicable feelings towards those scouts, but at this time, Akasha was not willing to hand her fate over to others. She recalled the words of the captain named Roddy, and her heart was filled with gratitude. No matter what, the reason she could make such a decision now was probably related to his words. With the conviction in her heart, the priest who had left the Viper Cross embarked on the road to the north and gradually disappeared into the shadows of the forest. 21 St. of September. On the second day after the incident with the heretics, the cleansing of Hollier City was in full swing. The remaining members of the Viper Cross were basically arrested, including those who used to belong to Akasha. But after Rubens found out the real reason why the 4 cavalry units were stopped, these people were not sent to the stake. Instead, they were given the opportunity to renounce darkness for light, and were sent to do hard labor to copy the teachings of the Church. As for the other heretics who came with Snaketooth Gallop, Rubens mercilessly sentenced them to death, waiting for a suitable day to be dragged to the stake and burned as a response to the provocation of the Viper Cross. As for Snaketooth Gallop, the Rose Cross chopped off his head and directly hung it in front of the largest southern gate of Hollier City, announcing the fate of the heretics. Do not assume that religion would be benevolent. In fact, when it came to fundamental interests, even the Rose Cross, that taught people to be kind, would similarly reveal its cruel and bloody side. So with such measures, the original atmosphere in Hollier City slowly calmed down from the heretic attack. Although there were still some people who were anxious, there were no other people who dared to openly cause trouble. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, but under the calm surface, there were always some undercurrents quietly surging. Mir was the most inconspicuous maid in the ducal palace. She was 27 years old this year, and had served this family for 10 years. In everyone's eyes, she was the kind of honest and conscientious woman, the kind of old virgin, who would run away shyly if someone said a few dirty words. But all of this was just appearance. When she finished the cleaning work in the early hours of the morning and returned to her simple little dormitory alone, Mir would change her timid and slightly reserved expression. At this time, the flashing grayish-white eyes and the indifferent expression all indicated her original identity, undead. After Alpha was killed by Roddy, there was immediately a major purge in the ducal palace. Fortunately, after the special transformation of her body, Mir was no different from an ordinary person, so the internal purge carried out by Duke did not uncover her. Therefore, Mir directly became the only undead informant left in the ducal palace. At this time, she had even replaced the former Alpha, becoming a subordinate directly under the command of Lord Ansedin. These days, Mir had been extremely cautious in passing all the information to the distant Tasman kingdom of the undead. Today, she finally secretly received a response from Lord Ansedin at the market. When the sky outside the window had just brightened, Mir, who was hiding in the dormitory, looked around. After confirming that there was no one around, she gently flipped over the letter that she had received at the market and softly read the contents of the deciphered code on the letter. There has been a new breakthrough in the research of potions. The Lucifron family can choose to give up the plan, but the people who killed Alpha must pay the price. The newly dispatched team will be sent to Hollier on the 26th. We need you to contact them and prepare for the follow-up. The Lucifron family must disappear. Maintain communication. Confirm the movement. When she read each sentence, the coldness and anger contained in it made even Mir shiver. She knew how much effort Lord Ansedin had put into the previous plan. The feeling of all his efforts going to waste in an instant was definitely an unbearable failure for him. Looking at the contents of the letter, she knew that Lord Ansedin had already sent out elite undead soldiers and would enter Hollier in 5 days. Usually, this meant that Lord Ansedin would use simple and crude means to solve the problem. Although Mir's strength was stronger than ordinary people, she could not intervene in such a matter. She knew the strength of the two knights by the Duke's side. Her role here could only be to pass on information and make sure that the undead killers were foolproof. After putting away the letter, Mir changed into a new maid costume and tidied up her long hair, which had long stopped growing. Just as she was about to go out and start cleaning the house, she heard another maid come in from outside and said, "Mir, Lord Duke ordered us to clean up Miss Sally's room. Come immediately." "Okay." She nodded, picked up the cleaning tools, and followed the maid out of the house. At the same time, in the Rose Cross Monastery, due to the large number of casualties caused by yesterday's battle, the work of appeasing and dealing with the aftermath was in full swing. The priests were busy treating the wounds and burying them, while the nuns and friars were constantly chanting prayers to let the dead rest in peace. The family members of the believers had been crying since last night, and now they finally quietened down. Vicar Rubens's mood was very complicated. After writing more than 10 letters throughout the night, he was now taking a walk in the flower bed of the monastery after a sleepless night. The exhaustion between his brows could not be concealed. Things have to be done one at a time. Go and take a rest today. I've already asked someone to prepare the bed. Rubens, I'll take care of the rest for a while. Benjamin, who had also been busy all night, came over and greeted Rubens. The two were old acquaintances, so there was no need to use honorifics, so their tone was very casual. I'm getting old and can't take it anymore. But time is a little tight, so I naturally have to hurry. Chapter 130. Benjamin knew that Rubens did not like to talk nonsense, so he swallowed his words of asking him to go to sleep. He just nodded and said, "Then I'll arrange a carriage later." "Why? Do you have something to say?" Rubens understood what Benjamin was implying and stopped in his tracks. "A little." Benjamin stroked his sparse beard and said in a low voice, "I think I know the identity of the archer. So fast?" The governor raised his eyebrows in surprise. He had sent people to investigate almost immediately after the battle ended, but it was like looking for a needle in a haystack for the simple-minded temple guards to track down a shooter hiding in the dark after such a chaotic battle. So, Rubens did not have much hope. But now that he heard Benjamin's words, his eyes lit up, and then he thought of something. He frowned slightly and said, "Is this person related to you?" Both of them were wily old foxes. Their brains worked fast, and they rarely hid anything in their word. Benjamin laughed bitterly and said helplessly, "There is indeed a relationship, but, sigh, I really don't know where to put my old face if this gets out. He has actually helped me a lot before." Reuben's interest was piqued. Just when he was about to listen carefully, a priest hurried out of the church and bowed in a low voice. "Lord Governor, Lord Bishop, there's a knight outside the monastery who wants to visit. He says his name is Titus, Knight Titus?" The two old men looked at each other and understood what the arrival of this knight meant. On the other side of the monastery, Sally did not seem to be in a good state. Although she had resolved the threat of Francis, killing her own brother, was not something she could forget after a night's sleep. Although her mind had long matured to the point where she could decisively kill, what really annoyed Sally was not the act of killing itself, but the psychological burden of doing it. She had changed her robe that was dyed crimson by blood, but she could still smell the thick smell of blood in her breath. It was a long night for Sally. When she closed her eyes, Francis's broken head kept appearing in front of her. When she opened her eyes, the oppressive darkness made her feel suffocated. After staying up all night like this, Sally, who was tense and exhausted, looked abnormally pale at this time, but she was strong after all, and did not collapse or cry because of this. When the sky was bright, Sally hastily tidied up and got up to find the bishop to tell him that she wanted to return to the mansion. However, the moment she pushed open the door, she bumped into Chris, who was looking for her. "Knight Titus is looking for me?" Hearing Chris's intentions, Sally had some doubts in her heart, but she immediately understood. "All right, I'll go now." Although her tone was calm, Sally looked very pale at this time. Her haggard look made people feel sorry for her. Chris worriedly accompanied her to the church. From afar, Sally saw Knight Titus, who was 2 heads taller than ordinary people. He waved at her from afar with a smile on his face. His simple and honest look was no different from the young knight she met a few years ago. Sally forced a smile and was about to greet him, but then she stopped for a moment. She saw that other than Bishop Benjamin, Bishop Rubens was also standing beside Knight Titus, looking at her with a warm smile on his face. Such a grand standard made Sally feel a little strange. She walked over and bowed to them one by one. Then she heard the conversation between the bishop and Knight Titus. "We will hold another speech on about the 25th, and after the speech, I will return to the Holy Cathedral." After some polite words, the bishop finally said what he really wanted to express. "So today, if it's possible, I hope to visit the ducal palace at noon and thank Duke for his help. I hope Knight Titus can pass on the message." Knight Titus scratched the back of his head and agreed somewhat clumsily. While the few of them were discussing, Sally, who was at the side, felt very uncomfortable. Her father had been seriously ill for a long time and could not think about such a problem. Although Knight Titus agreed now, he would probably send someone to tactfully reject it later. After a few formulaic replies, Sally received the special permission to return to the ducal palace. However, sitting in the carriage, she did not feel the slightest bit excited or gratified. She only looked at the scenery that flashed before her eyes with a numb expression. Although the threat had been removed, at this moment, Sally did not feel much joy or comfort in her heart. Even if she returned to the ducal palace, what could she do? In terms of politics, although she was stronger than the average person, she was still a child after all. Such a large territory, and now she was the only one left to work hard to maintain it. She was afraid that it would not take long for someone to target the Lucifron family. As for Roddy, thinking of this blockhead, Sally could only shake her head helplessly. After all, there was no way he could help with the affairs of the territory. Her heart was in a mess, and even Sally did not notice that the person who greeted her at the mansion before the new year was no longer Butler Alpha. She walked with increasingly heavy steps to the door of her father's bedroom. When she looked at the silhouette sitting on the armchair, the indescribable feeling of oppression in her heart became even clearer. If this goes on, what should I do? Who will manage the affairs of the territory? How will I explain to the monastery? Am I really going to be a priest forever? Father, I'm back. Just like in the past, Sally greeted Angmar with a slightly hoarse voice. For a very, very long time, Sally had hoped that her father, who had already lost consciousness, would respond to her. However, over the past 5 years, she had always given up after being disappointed again and again. Saying this sentence now was just a habit that Sally maintained. After saying this, she continued to walk forward, not expecting any reply at all. However, welcome home, child. The response from the front made her respond instinctively, but because her mind was in a mess, Sally did not even notice the abnormality of the situation at first. Until after taking 2 steps, she suddenly stopped, then raised her head and stared straight ahead. Her body trembled slightly, and her extremely pale cheeks were now as white as a sheet of paper. In her field of vision, the Dukes of Angmar, who was originally facing the fireplace, slowly turned his head. His face that had long been expressionless in her memory now had a familiar smile on it, and his pupils shone with a deep light. Angmar blinked his eyes and softly said, "Why, don't you recognize me?" "Father. Father." Sally's mouth was wide open, and then she finally confirmed that she was not hallucinating. Her legs seemed to not listen to her, and she walked in front of her father, staring blankly at the old man who had not spoken to her for a few years. She opened her mouth to say something, but in the end, just like when she was a child, she directly threw herself into her father's arms, and cried loudly. On the other side, the scouts in the hotel in Cambay had all woken up. At this time, Roddy was putting oil on the short bowstring. Beside him, Sodeler tightened the buckle of the arm guard and casually asked, "What's the next plan?" "Stay put and pay attention to the situation at all times. I'll go to the monastery and ask Sally about the situation first." Roddy blew on the bowstring. The oil was brewed with animal fat, and the smell was a little pungent, but he quite liked this strange smell. He gently sniffed and joked, "Hey, I suddenly think, if Sally has already inherited the Duke, it won't be a problem for her to give us the title of knight." Sodeler raised his eyebrows, very interested in this topic. He asked, "If you really get the title of knight, where do you want to choose as a fief?" "Pick a fief, my ass. I don't want to find a place to live every day by collecting rent." Roddy bounced on the bowstring, his mind filled with various dungeon guides and the list of dropped items. "Didn't I say that I want to make you the kingdom's #1 knight regiment? Well, I believe you." Sodeler rolled his eyes, but was immediately kicked by Roddy. "Don't always think that I'm talking nonsense. Speaking of which, if you really want to get the title of knight, then you can be the knight. That way, Caitlug and the others can follow you to the fief to continue training." "What do you mean?" Sodeler raised his eyebrows, a little puzzled. "I'll be the knight? Then what are you doing?" "I have my reasons. You'll know later." Roddy said as he opened his experience bar, but did not explain anything. Speaking of which, Roddy was actually thinking about the matter of titles, related to noble titles. In the game, after level 10, players would generally start to obtain titles. There were many ways to obtain them, and at the same time, one could choose to activate a title to obtain additional attributes or skills. The cooldown was 24 hours. This sounded similar to Battle Stance, but in reality, it was completely different. The additional effects of Battle Stance were basically linked to the skills of one's class. Titles, on the other hand, were a completely different matter. Some gave attributes while others gave auras. In short, there were all sorts of effects, but they were not linked to the skills of the class. When Rhodey was talking about being awarded the title of Knight earlier, he was not trying to be modest or stand behind the scenes to be a mastermind. His thinking was very simple. A passive title of nobility was not as powerful as an active title of nobility. That was why he was determined to be a noble who occupied an ownerless land and obtained the title of knight, instead of being awarded the title of knight. After I'm done here, I might need to make a trip to the Silent Forest. Roddy thought about the plan in his mind and made arrangements. As for whether you'll return to Norland Village or somewhere else, I can't decide that, but I can confirm that the treatment won't be bad. To the Silent Forest? Do you need our help? Sodeler was a little puzzled, but did not ask for the reason. Roddy naturally knew that the advancement mission had to be completed alone. He shook his head and said, I might have to go alone for a while, so I'll have to sell the crystal fragments in Kegtown or somewhere else. The money I get should be enough for you to train for a while. Don't stop, you have to do it every day. Chapter 131. A little. Swordsmanship and horsemanship. In short, if I continue training like this, I might be able to improve, but it still can't compare to the improvement brought by combat. Sodeler frowned. The idea of becoming stronger had always been his goal in following Roddy, so he had a very intuitive understanding of his own strength. Have you ever thought of becoming a knight? I'm not talking about that useless title, but a real knight. The kind that can lead an army on the battlefield. Roddy smiled. This has nothing to do with being the kingdom's first cavalry regiment. I just feel that with your physical fitness and ability, if paired with a warhorse, you should be able to better display your strength. Sodeler seriously considered this question, then replied, I know that knights are strong, but the equipment and energy required, that's not a problem. Hearing Roddy's promise, he smiled helplessly and nodded. If that's the ideal situation, I'm willing to become a knight. That's good. But I want to ask you a question. Have you heard of Knight Wellington? Roddy recalled the advanced profession of knight, but suddenly asked such an unrelated question. Knight Wellington? The Shadow Knight by Duke Lucifran's side? Sodeler frowned and thought for a moment. I only know that he's very powerful, but he rarely fights. I don't know much about him. Why did you suddenly mention him? He's actually far more powerful than you think. What I mean is, before Roddy could finish, Carter hurriedly ran up from downstairs and said loudly, Captain Roddy, outside the inn, there's a knight from the ducal palace looking for you. Who? Roddy stood up and asked. He said his name is Wellington. Carter swallowed his saliva, and his expression was one of awe. Obviously, he knew what this name meant. A few minutes later, sitting in the carriage of the ducal palace, Roddy had basically guessed what he would face today. Knight Wellington had personally come to welcome him. Such treatment was enough to explain a lot of problems. When he looked at the tall knight riding on a warhorse outside the carriage, he couldn't help but think of what he wanted to say to Sodeler. Simply put, what he wanted to discuss with Sodeler was the future direction of his advanced profession. The reason why he mentioned Wellington was because his advanced profession happened to be one of the few IMBA professions that Roddy knew, Ghost Knight. In the memory of the other world, Roddy had never seen the Knight of Wellington in the game. That was because the knight had died in a battle in the year 594. But the reason why he could remember this name clearly was because once the video of the Ghost Knight was released, it caused a huge uproar among the players. At that time, this powerful knight had advanced to Ghost Knight level 50. He led more than 200 defeated soldiers and was besieged by 3,000 elite orcs. When they broke out of the siege, the Wellington Knight led 6 ghost doppelgangers, with extremely high attack power and directly crushed nearly 100 wolf riders and orcs. The powerful strength that he displayed completely shocked the players. Although the Knight of Wellington eventually died of physical exhaustion due to being outnumbered, his combat ability had become the focus of discussion for a period of time. This IMBA profession had also become the target of countless players' fantasies. Roddy's previous idea was how to let Sodeler obtain the inheritance of this knight. His thinking was very direct. Titus and Wellington were both guardian knights of the Dukes of Angmar and had no chance of becoming his subordinates. If it was about training, directly letting a talented guy like Sodeler learn was definitely the best choice. But as for how to find an opportunity, that was the problem he had to think about next. But Roddy knew that at this time, the first thing he had to face was the awakened Dukes of Angmar. And what decision would the other party make after seeing his letter? Friendly to him? Vigilant? Or a combination of both? Looking at Knight Wellington, who was walking in front of the carriage, Roddy frowned slightly. In his heart, he had no confidence in guessing what such a powerful lord was thinking. Why think so much? Anyway, there won't be any conflict. He shook his head, exhaled, leaned back in the chair, and sighed softly. At the same time, the atmosphere in the ducal palace seemed to be very warm. The busy servants were walking back and forth in the corridor, passing documents, preparing lunch, and reporting the taxes. The once deserted mansion was restored to its original liveliness. Sally pushed open the door and sighed in her heart. It seemed that she hadn't seen such a scene for many years. When she suddenly walked out of the shadow that had shrouded her for a long time, her heart was still not used to such a change. So every time she looked around, Sally always tried hard to imprint everything in front of her in her mind, for fear that all of this was just a dream that she would wake up from at any time. At this time, it had been 2 hours since she returned to the ducal palace. Until now, her heart was still filled with an inexplicable satisfaction and joy. This was not only because of her father's recovery, but more because she knew who healed her father. Duke very briefly told her about Roddy, and the letter that Roddy left behind was also read by Sally. The things written in the letter were actually very formulaic. It only described the threat that the orcs, the undead, and Francis posed to Ifta's territory. Although it seemed a little alarmist to ordinary people, from the political point of view of a feudal lord, the things written in the letter were indeed very effective. In some of the conversations, Sally could hear some praise in her father's words, which naturally made her very happy. Mississippi, while thinking about the next arrangements, Sally was stopped by a maid who ran not far away. She turned her head and smiled. "Mir, what's the matter?" Mir, who had a flawless disguise, put on a happy face and replied, "Master wants you to go to the study. He said that there may be an important guest for lunch." "Okay, I'll go right away." Sally, who was in a good mood, responded with a smile. Then, she gently lifted the hem of her white dress and trotted to her father's study. She was as cheerful as a little deer. But behind her, although Mir still maintained his smile, the smile in his eyes had subtly turned cold. Not long after, Dukes of Angmar, who was writing a letter in the study, noticed his daughter's arrival. After finishing the last stroke, he inserted the quill into the ink bottle and said casually, "You haven't returned to your bedroom for a long time, right? How are you feeling?" "Everything is the same as before." Sally smiled, but her eyes also dimmed slightly. More or less the same, Francis's bedroom had been completely emptied. When Sally discovered this, she knew that her father already knew the cause and effect of the matter. But the father and daughter had a tacit understanding not to mention this matter. Sally was actually still worried, but the attitude of the Dukes of Angmar was really something that she, as a daughter, could not see through. Of course, some things can't be returned. Angmar smiled. His tone was very calm, and the melancholy was quickly covered up. He raised his head and said, "You should have heard about the luncheon. I just received news that Governor Rubens will be coming, so it's better to dress formally for the luncheon. Okay. Sally walked behind her father obediently and gently massaged his shoulders. Angmar smiled happily and continued, "By the way, in addition to Titus and Wellington, there should be someone else present." In the past, her father rarely emphasized this kind of thing to her. Sally raised her eyebrows. "I know him." "Of course you know him. It's Roddy." "Hey, daughter, be a little gentler." What is he doing here?" Sally's voice was obviously a little strange. I mean, he's a scout captain, why?" "No. Father, you're messing with me." Sally immediately understood what her father was thinking. She punched Angmar's shoulder with her little fist, causing the dukes to burst into laughter. This was the first time he saw his daughter with such an expression. He could not help but ask curiously, "I didn't mean to test you. Don't hold a grudge against me. Go and prepare first. If there's anything else, we can talk about it at noon." Okay, I'll go now." "No, I don't want him to come." Sally was originally happy, but then she remembered Roddy's extremely asshole reply when she confessed last night. She immediately became angry, wrinkled her nose, snorted a few times, and left angrily. The Dukes of Angmar had a funny expression on his face. Although he did not understand why his daughter was so angry, he knew that she probably fell in love with someone. He smiled and shook his head, then turned his attention to the upcoming lunch. He reached out to pick up the letter from Roddy on the desk, and the Duke suddenly narrowed his eyes and whispered, "What kind of young man is he?" It did not take long for Roddy's carriage to pass through the city and arrive at Lucifron Ducal Palace. However, just as the luxurious carriage bypassed the sculptures and flower beds in front of the mansion, he noticed through the window another carriage that entered the mansion at almost the same time as him. Looking at the gold and red rose and cross emblem outside the carriage, Roddy could not help but frown. The governor is here too? As for the rose and cross, Roddy still had the mentality of a player, that is, I only want reputation and rewards, nothing else. Therefore, even if he met the governor or even the cardinal, he had no interest in talking to them or cozying up to them. At this moment, when he saw the governor, he did not have the slightest respect or fear in his heart. He just did not understand why the Duke would invite him and the governor to lunch at the same time. Could it be that Rubens wanted to thank me for saving his life? When he got off the carriage, Roddy inevitably had to meet the Knight of Wellington and Rubens, who was wearing a robe. Therefore, he quickly realized that things were not as he imagined. When the governor saw Roddy, he was neither enthusiastic nor cold. He asked butler John beside him with a reserved expression. John naturally did not speak much, so he simply replied, "This is the Nolan Village Scout Captain, Roddy." "Oh, hello." This was Rubens's reaction after he nodded and continued walking. Obviously, he had no idea that it was this young man in front of him who saved his life yesterday. In his eyes, the difference in status between the scout captain and the governor was not even on the same level. When Rubens heard the title of scout captain, he had already put Roddy on the ignore list. The governor's reaction made Roddy feel very awkward, but he was not shameless enough to directly ask for credit. Therefore, when he saw the governor's obvious perfunctory and disdainful attitude toward him, Roddy could only helplessly purse his lips and silently follow behind. Chapter 132. Time passed, and when the bell rang to signify the arrival of noon, the luncheon was about to officially begin. When the Dukes of Angmar walked into the dining hall with a golden-laid cane in his hand, Roddy could not help but admire the old man's extraordinary bearing. Although he had been tortured by the soul extraction potion for several years, after a period of recovery, the current Angmar was hale and hearty. His footsteps were steady, and even though his body was still skinny, his entire person glowed with a vitality that had never been seen before. At this time, his gaze swept around and first stopped on Rubens. It is the honor of the Lucifron family that the governor has graced us with your presence. After exchanging a few pleasantries with Rubens, he then turned his gaze to Roddy and greeted him meaningfully. As a father, I want to thank you for taking care of my daughter, Captain Roddy. Such words made Rubens feel that something was amiss, but he really could not think of any relationship between a scout captain and Sally, so he did not take it seriously and continued to look on coldly. It is my honor, Sir Duke. Roddy blinked his eyes and gave a military salute. He did not say anything unnecessary, showing that he was not surprised by the favor or humiliation. Although he looked calm on the surface, Roddy at this time could not figure out the old man's attitude at all. Angmar did not mention his identity or the things he had done before, but only expressed his gratitude in such a vague way. So, was he thanking him or threatening him? To be honest, Roddy hoped that the things he had done would not be made public. Making a fortune in silence was the first stable path. Now, it seemed that Benjamin did not reveal his situation, and Angmar did not seem to be planning to make it public either. Although it sounded like good news, this meant that the following luncheon would definitely be quite awkward for him. However, when everyone was about to sit down, Roddy still had some hope in his heart. If Sally could cooperate and adjust the atmosphere, he should still be able to eat this meal in peace, right? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, he caught a glimpse of the beautiful figure that arrived late. When Sally walked into the hall, it was indeed a stunning sight. Even the Dukes of Angmar raised his eyebrows slightly. Then, he smiled and said softly, "My daughter has really grown up." She was wearing a bright red full-length dress, a lace tunic, a crystal headpiece, and a simple crystal necklace. The slightly mature attire made Sally, who had a well-developed figure, seem to have transformed from a girl to a young lady. Her slender waist appeared even more slender under the effect of the waistband, and her exposed collarbone had an enchanting curve. Her delicate oval face had light makeup on. When she looked at the table, Sally bowed and greeted the superintendent respectfully. Her aristocratic manners were on point. Secretly noticing that Roddy's eyes were wide open, the corners of Sally's mouth curled up imperceptibly. Then, she sat down beside her father in satisfaction. Her current appearance was the complete opposite of the plain robe she used to wear in the past. After greeting the superintendent, she greeted the two knights. However, when her gaze turned to Roddy, she pouted and looked away. This scene was really beyond Roddy's expectations. The words he had prepared to say were stuck in his throat, and the atmosphere at the table instantly became unusually awkward. The superintendent saw this scene from the side, and in his heart, he could not understand why Roddy would sit here and have lunch with them. On the other hand, the Dukes of Angmar was also surprised that his daughter would do such a thing. However, he was, after all, experienced. He immediately made small talk to smooth things over and asked the waiters to start serving the dishes. Although Roddy was abnormally embarrassed at this moment, he could definitely say that he deserved it. Vengeful creatures like women were the last to be provoked. Yesterday, he used such stupid words to reply to her confession, and today, he still expected her to give him face? It was completely a dream. Thinking about how Sally ran away in anger because of him yesterday, Roddy smiled helplessly and bitterly. I really did something stupid unintentionally. The exquisite dishes were served one by the servants, and aged red wine was poured into glasses. The rich red wine reflected the different expressions of the people at the table. Rubens was the first to express his gratitude to the Duke, and this also opened up a lot of topic. Soon, Angmar, Sally, and even the two knights joined in the discussion. In such an atmosphere, Roddy remained silent and aloof, unable to participate in any of the topics, and could only focus on eating by himself. Very soon, Sally noticed this. Looking at Roddy sitting pitifully in the corner and playing with the fish on his plate, she also felt that she had gone overboard. Therefore, she deliberately brought up a few topics related to the border in an attempt to salvage the situation, hoping that Roddy would join in. However, the result was that Roddy did not appreciate her kindness and continued to lower his head in silence. This bastard! Infuriating! After angrily drinking a mouthful of red wine, Sally gloomily gestured to the maidservant beside her. The maidservant Mir immediately respectfully brought the wine bottle and carefully poured the wine for Sally. Then, she took a few steps back and stood to the side. No one at the table noticed the maidservant. Although Mir stood behind Sally with a smile, he was not worried if he would be noticed. This undead just stood there openly in the dining hall, and even the Rose-Cross viceroy who was 2 meters away could not detect her true identity. Lord Ansedin will soon come to reap your lives. Rejoice in the last part of your life. With this thought in his mind, Mir's gaze swept across the people at the table one by one, and finally stopped at the silent figure. This young man is really strange. He was invited to lunch by Duke, but all he does is bury his head and eat? Scout Captain, why would Duke invite such a person to his mansion? Mir had some doubts in her heart, but they quickly dissipated. Mir's mission was to collect useful information, and for a marginal character like Roddy, she understood that there was no need for her to pay attention to him. When she shifted her gaze away, she completely ignored this character and turned her attention to memorizing the conversations of these old men. The orcs in the north seem to be up to no good recently. But speaking of which, those orcs are obviously weak. Most of them are just barbaric fellows who are driven by instinct. When Reuben said this, Roddy finally seemed to be a little interested. After looking up, he raised the spoon in his hand and waited for the viceroy to continue. Speaking of which, the Rose-Cross also has some concerns about the orcs. But according to our research, although these fellows are strong, they are ultimately cowardly. If they were to face the human army, they would probably flee at the first sign of trouble. Cough, 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 cough. Just as Rubens finished his sentence, Roddy's cough suddenly sounded, interrupting his profound theory about the orcs. The 2 knights held their wine glasses and looked at him. Sally pretended not to notice and glanced at him, while the Dukes of Angmar looked at him with a meaningful gaze, but did not say anything. I just thought of something interesting. I couldn't hold it in just now, my apologies. Cough, cough. Rubens frowned, obviously thinking that this fellow was crazy. He immediately changed the topic and said, "Of course, the threat of the orcs is not worth mentioning. What we are truly worried about is the battle of the lords in the south of the kingdom." He paused for a moment, enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention, and continued, "Some time ago, Lord Gordon finally mobilized his army to suppress Earl Moore. There are a total of 7,000 to 8,000 men. Oh? There's such a thing? Then Earl Moore is in danger. Before coming to Hollier, I heard that Earl Moore has been retreating in defeat. His army has always been at a disadvantage, and I don't think it's going to be too optimistic." Topics related to war were always the most attention-grabbing. Thus, the matter of Roddy's random cough was quickly forgotten, and the few people at the dining table began to discuss fervently. As the topic gradually came to an end, Rubens suddenly changed the topic and said, "The outcome of this battle will definitely affect the situation in the south of the kingdom. By the way, what is Captain Rhodey's opinion on this?" This kind of question was naturally a little revenge for Roddy's previous behavior. This kind of topic that involved the battle of the nobles was the best to see the level of the speaker. For example, the 2 knights would analyze the formation of the army, the Dukes of Angmar would analyze the economic and political situation, and even Sally was able to point out the major advantages of Gordon. Leaving Roddy at the end to ask the question seemed to be deliberately making things difficult for him. "What's your opinion?" Roddy was actually looking at the quest panel in boredom, studying the clues for the Witcher advancement quest. When he heard the question, he thought about it seriously and finally answered, "I don't think Earl Moore will lose." Haha, hearing Roddy's answer, the half-hearted laughter in Rubens's voice disappeared. He looked up and continued to ask, "What's the specific reason?" "There are many reasons to win a battle, but in the end there's only one," Roddy shrugged. "Earl Moore is smarter than Gordon, and that's the only reason." Hearing such remarks, Rubens only smiled and shook his head. He did not pursue the matter and turned to chat with the Dukes of Angmar. Up until now, Roddy as a participant was definitely a failure. He was not the center of the conversation, nor did he participate in the discussion. His only role seemed to be to eat all the delicious food, and when others asked him questions, he would act like a clown and make a few jokes. He was really no different from the impression he gave others as the scout captain. Chapter 133. Sally was slightly anxious. She increasingly felt that Roddy was in such a predicament because of her willful and mischievous behavior. However, no matter how she tried to salvage the situation, Roddy was still, "You guys talk, I'll eat my food." After staying like this for a long time, Sally finally softened and decided to chat with this guy to save some face. However, when she raised her head, she found that Roddy was looking straight at her. Such a direct stare made Sally's cheeks a little red. However, she immediately noticed that Roddy's expression suddenly became a little strange. His gaze also shifted slightly to the side. Following Roddy's gaze, Sally found that he was looking at her maid, Mir, who was standing behind her. Mir also noticed Roddy's gaze and asked with some doubt, "Captain Roddy, is there anything I can help you with?" "Oh, can you help me?" Roddy smiled as he picked up the wine glass in his hand and swirled it. "Pour some wine?" "Okay." Mir nodded and immediately walked to Roddy's side. When he poured the wine, he found that the scout captain's gaze was always on him. What does this mean? Not only Mir, even Sally was a little puzzled as to why Roddy was like this. Why was he staring at someone else's maid for no reason? Mir couldn't be a bad person. Could it be that he likes this type of woman? A girl's imagination was always out of this world, not to mention their ability to get jealous. At this time, although Sally didn't really believe that Roddy would have a cramp in his brain to like his own ordinary maid, such a thought still made her heart sour. Of course, as a native of this world, Sally would never know what Roddy was worried about. In fact, a few minutes ago, Roddy was bored to death thinking about the Witcher's advancement mission. Later on, he could not think of anything. Then, he suddenly thought of comparing the two knights, Titus and Wellington, to see who was stronger. So, he secretly opened the surrounding characters' status bar, wanting to see whose level was higher. However, because of this reason, he immediately felt that someone in this room was not quite right. All the maids' names, including Butler John's name, in Roddy's eyes, were harmless green. Only the maid behind Sally, whose basic level was almost the same as Roddy's, was shown as yellow. The surrounding character's status bar couldn't show whether a stranger was a friend or foe, so although he was vigilant, he couldn't directly ask Mir's identity. What if she was just a female bodyguard protecting Sally in secret? However, the cautious Roddy still felt that this situation wasn't quite right, especially after the appearance of an undead spy like Alpha in the ducal palace. He wasn't naive enough to think that there was nothing fishy about this place. So when the maid named Mir poured wine beside him, he suddenly interrupted Bishop Rubens's discussion about the relationship between believers and churches and directly asked, "By the way, have you heard of the undead in Tasman?" When this question came out, everyone was stunned, including Mir, who had just poured wine for Roddy. The maid's heart skipped a beat, but because she was used to wearing a wooden expression, she didn't show any extra expression. She just slowly retreated behind Sally without a change in expression. "Tasman? There hasn't been any news from there for a long time." "Captain Roddy, do you have anything new to say?" The superintendent, who had been interrupted, frowned at Roddy. He now had a lot of opinions about this inconspicuous but impolite scout captain, so his words were vaguely sarcastic. But the Dukes of Angmar raised his eyebrows slightly, vaguely thinking of something. Without batting an eyelid, he said, "The Tasman Kingdom has existed for more than 1,000 years. Although they remain silent most of the time, I remember that they have had a few exchanges with the Kingdom of Karen, and they have always maintained a friendly attitude. If I remember correctly, the last time there was news of them was 22 years ago." Roddy and Duke looked at each other. Although they had never had much interaction, they had an indescribable tacit understanding at that moment. Angmar's words gave him a chance to continue, so Roddy immediately said, "It's like this. Some time ago, I heard a name and a story about an undead from a bard. It seems to be called Ansadin or something. The story is about the undead trying to destroy the entire continent. I've always wondered if the Tasman Kingdom would do that." As Roddy spoke, he glanced at Mir, who was standing behind Sally, intentionally or unintentionally. His acute environment combat stance immediately confirmed a certain possibility. But before Roddy could say anything else, Rubens's cold snort froze the atmosphere at the dining table. "This is utter nonsense." The Viceroy waved his hand, obviously disdainful of Roddy's remarks. "Can you believe the words of a bard? Can you believe a story that comes from hearsay? Captain Roddy, do you think this is very interesting?" This was a merciless rebuttal. Although his tone was still calm, the imposing aura of a superior still silenced the dining table instantly. Roddy rubbed his eyebrows and did not respond. The Dukes of Angmar looked puzzled. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Rubens. Like the two knights, Sally looked left and right in confusion, unable to understand what was going on. At this time, the dessert was served, which meant that the luncheon was almost over. Rubens was not interested in continuing to harp on Roddy. Instead, he spoke of the other purpose of today's visit. "Forget it, let's talk about something else." Before we arrived at Hollier, Bishop Benjamin kept mentioning in his letters that Sister Sally was extremely talented in the cultivation of divine arts. Now that I have seen it with my own eyes, I have also confirmed this fact. Seeing that everyone at the table except for Roddy had turned to look at him, he continued, after this speech, "I am also preparing to return to the Holy Cathedral. So I hope that I can bring Sister Sally back with me and participate in the Holy Cathedral training that will last for about 2 years. This is a screening that the Holy Cathedral conducts every 5 years. I myself only have one place in this plan, so I hope that Sir Duke can fulfill my wish. Consider it as my gratitude to the Lucifron family." As soon as Rubens's voice fell, the dining hall suddenly became silent. The Dukes of Angmar narrowed his eyes, quickly thinking about the hidden meaning behind Rubens's words. Sally frowned, still not understanding what this training meant. But soon, she remembered something that she had heard a long time ago. Every 5 years, the Rose Cross clergy and above would select some extremely talented young people and bring them to the Holy Cathedral for 2 years or more of training. In the past, these people were known as geniuses. After entering the Holy Cathedral for training, not only would their strength skyrocket, even their status would rise accordingly. Those overly young bishops and diocesan bishops were basically such people. And now, Rubens told Sally that she had such an opportunity and qualification. Her heart was first filled with joy, but then it suddenly trembled for 2 years. When she thought of this time limit, Sally suddenly realized what this opportunity meant. If she left with the dean, then she would not be able to see Roddy for the next 2 years. 2 years. Sally suddenly felt that her breathing had suddenly become difficult. Although she used to be sad and tearful because of the stories of the princess and the knight mentioned by the bards, when such a thing really happened to her, the huge feeling of helplessness immediately pressed down on her like a mountain. Her eyes were instantly filled with confusion, and a lot of messy thoughts kept popping up in her mind. Should I go or not? How should I tell Roddy? Will he wait for me? Could it be that he had already left after I came back? Or, if such a matter was taken away, Sally would definitely be able to think clearly and thoroughly about it. But at this moment, because she was thinking about Roddy, the so-called balancing the pros and cons was immediately and completely ignored in front of her perceptual thinking. She opened her mouth slightly, not knowing how to answer for a moment. But before Sally could answer the Dean, Roddy's words very abruptly and ruthlessly sounded in her ears. "This is a good opportunity. It would be even better if you stay for a few more years. It's best if you stay there and don't come back." Stay for a few more years? Stay there and don't come back? Sally stood there in a daze, her mind buzzing. She could not believe what Roddy said at all. Does he not want to see me at all? Does he want me to leave and never come back? How can he do this? Does he hate me that much? Once a girl's thoughts were stuck in a dead end, it was absolutely impossible to pull her back. Sally recalled Roddy's behavior when she confessed, and the sourness in her heart immediately surged. Her nose turned sour and her tears almost fell. "I'm not feeling well." Sally covered her mouth and looked at Roddy for a good 3 to 4 seconds. Crystal clear tears glistened in her eyes. Then, she suddenly turned around and ran out of the dining hall while sobbing. Such a sudden change stunned Rubens. He immediately blamed the culprit on Roddy, who was talking nonsense. He turned to the scout captain angrily and reprimanded, "Captain Roddy, what do you mean by that?" The superintendent bishop had been in a high position for a long time. When he rebuked Roddy in such a manner, it was indeed imposing. However, Roddy did not care about such a question at all. He stood up and raised his arms in front of him. This posture was like a hooligan who was ready to fight at the slightest disagreement. The dean's eyes twitched. He thought to himself that this young man was really too arrogant. He actually wanted to fight at the slightest disagreement? Seeing Roddy's reaction, Rubens immediately got up and prepared to deal with it. He had already started chanting the prayer of the divine incantation to attack, but halfway through the process, he discovered a problem. Chapter 134. Hlukji Smear. As Roddy recited the incantation to activate the ring, a bright light suddenly shone. When the light appeared, although the Dukes of Angmar seemed to be sitting motionless, his palms under the dining table had already clenched into fists. The 2 knights beside him had already jumped up and looked at Roddy suspiciously and warily. From rudely interrupting the Viceroy's words to now, Roddy's behavior was completely baffling. He talked back to Rubens, angered Sally to tears, and now, he even shone this glowing ring in front of him. Everything he did was so ridiculous that everyone's eyes fell on Roddy. They almost thought he was completely crazy. But Roddy did not care about the reactions of the people around him. He held the ring in his hand and stared straight at Mir, who had covered her face with her hands because of the light. 1 second, 2 seconds, after holding the ring for 2 seconds, Roddy found that Mir did not seem to have any extra reaction. He could not help but wonder if he had made a mistake. But just as he was about to put down his arm and let the light disappear, Mir screamed, "Something's wrong." Roddy saw the cracked and blackened skin on her palm and immediately confirmed her identity. Without any nonsense, he picked up a table knife and jumped over the dining table, heading straight for Mir. Just like Alpha, although Mir's disguise made her look no different from a human, her skin could not withstand the light. Cracks immediately appeared on her exposed skin after being illuminated by the light. Then, the skin began to curl and fall off. Her fair hands were instantly charred, as if they had been roasted by fire. When all this happened, Duke, the Viceroy, and the 2 knights who were still suspicious of Roddy were completely stunned. At this time, Roddy had already used the leap skill and pounced over. The powerful explosive force displayed by the advanced profession skill was really terrifying. Roddy's body almost flew over the dining table and jumped in front of Mir. Mir sensed his arrival and stretched out her hand to resist. Her thin arms and legs were much stronger than they looked. When she swung her fist, there was a faint sound of wind. Her other hand pulled out a dagger from the inside of her thigh and stabbed it directly at Roddy. SSSSS. The dagger pierced through Roddy's armpit. The sharp blade that was originally going to stab his heart only cut through Roddy's coat. Mir's fist was directly slapped away by Roddy. Smack! Mir watched as Roddy leaned close to her and punched her in the chest. Boom! This was the first time Roddy, who had the enhancement from his equipment, attacked with all his might on the ground. Although he did not know any fist techniques, the fact that Mir was sent flying 3 to 4 meters away and hit the wall proved that he did not need any fancy moves with his level of strength. Mir, who was sent flying, hit the wall behind her like a cannonball. Then, with a thud sound, she fell to the floor pathetically. At this time, the 2 knights at the side had already strode over, but their movements were obviously not as fast as Roddy. He kicked away Mir's outstretched arm, bent over, and punched Mir's face without any fancy moves. The latter's entire head directly hit the floor with a boom sound. Purplish-black blood flowed down from her eye socket, and a rancid smell immediately appeared in the dining room. If this punch landed on an ordinary maid, her head would have exploded. However, Mir, who also had a base level of 10, only bled. She struggled frantically, and her petite body erupted with astonishing strength. But all her counterattacks were almost useless because of the light from the ring on Roddy's hand. He brandished the dagger in his hand and stabbed wildly. However, Roddy caught it and twisted it. Gotcha! The dagger broke on the spot. Roddy's gaze was completely cold and emotionless. After breaking the other party's wrist like a chopstick, he waved the table knife in his hand like lightning and nailed Mir's arm to the floor from the elbow. This was not the end. He raised his hand to pick up the dagger, bent over, and nailed her other arm with a "ka" sound. Titus and Wellington, who had already rushed over, looked at each other in dismay. They really felt that Roddy's move was too cruel and too swift. After all this was done, Roddy rode on Mir's struggling body and used a spell to turn off the light. Then, he placed the warm ring directly on her forehead and shouted, "Try moving again!" After being shouted at, Mir immediately stopped moving. She trembled and did not dare to move again. After the burning pain disappeared, she seemed to have collapsed and stopped struggling. Her gray eyes stared at the ring on her forehead in horror. She opened her mouth, but could not even speak. Mir's mind was filled with fear. At this moment, her consciousness was completely blank. She never thought that the scout captain, who no one paid attention to and even made people laugh at, would have such an ability. The disguise had failed. This time she was dead. When the 2 iron tower-like knights appeared in her vision, Mir did not even have the intention to struggle. She only saw one of the knights squat down and raise his hand towards her, and then completely lost consciousness. Don't kill her, she may know something else. When Knight Wellington single-handedly lifted Mir up like a sack, Roddy frowned and said. These words were already close to an order, but Wellington looked at the Dukes of Angmar and nodded happily. He even showed a smile and whispered, "Well done." Roddy was not interested in being polite at this time. After confirming that Mir could not escape, he directly sat on the chair that Sally was sitting on just now and took deep breaths. Damn it, it's actually the undead, this group of bastards. Cursing this group of damn bones in his mind, Roddy only felt a little weak. This kind of thing was completely beyond his imagination. Although it was only 20 seconds from the start of the attack to the end, the response, counterattack, and quick-thinking decisions were extremely exhausting. He took 3 to 4 deep breaths before raising his head. But when he looked to the side again, he found that the Dukes of Angmar, the governor, and Knight Titus who stayed here were all looking straight at him. The atmosphere was strangely quiet. Roddy laughed dryly and pointed to the position where Mir was just now. He wanted to explain something, but felt that it was unnecessary to talk nonsense. He simply picked up the wine glass next to him and drank it clean. Then he said to the Dukes of Angmar, accident. It's all an accident, to be honest. At this time, the Dukes of Angmar and the governor really did not know what to say. Both of them were smart politicians, and naturally, they immediately understood a fact. This scout captain had definitely made a great contribution. Who would have thought that the maid standing behind Sally was an undead? Who would have thought that she would have hidden a dagger with her? Who could be sure, if it was not for Roddy, she would have directly stabbed Sally to death just now? Not to mention this, if one looked at the long term, if there was such an undead in the ducal palace, it would definitely be something that would definitely cause people to feel uneasy. This was especially so for the Dukes of Angmar. The race of undead had become a taboo in his eyes. It could only be described as a mortal enemy. After Alpha died a few days ago, he immediately carried out a fierce and ruthless investigation. Even so, he did not expect that there would be such an undead lurking around him. The more he thought about it, the more cold sweat broke out on the old Duke's back. He understood that he had once again wandered around the line between life and death. If it was not for Roddy, he was afraid that he would have fallen into the hands of the undead sooner or later. On the other side of the dining table, the governor's expression changed several times in succession. At first, it was surprise, followed by amazement, and finally indescribable shame. He never thought that the dinner that was supposed to end soon would have such a dramatic turn of event. There were many powerful people in this room, and Rubens had never thought of himself as a weakling. However, as the governor of the Rose Cross and a user of the Holy Light Theurgy, not only did he not notice the undead spy standing right under his nose, he even looked at the young man who had helped the ducal palace avoid a disaster. How embarrassing! Now that he thought about it, Rubens could only say that he was too ashamed to show his face, but no matter how he defended himself, the truth had already been set, and it could not be changed at all. The atmosphere at the dining table was very quiet. Roddy's gaze swept across, but he felt that these old fellows' gazes were a little strange. He had no choice but to raise the ring in his hand and explain, "Don't look at me like that. I also just noticed that there was something wrong with that fellow. This ring happens to be able to distinguish undead. Just now I was afraid that she would hurt Sally, so, Captain Roddy." At this time, the old Duke who spoke had already completely affirmed Roddy in his heart. If at first he still had the thought of considering Roddy's position, strength, and temperament, then after such a thing happened, Angmar no longer had any doubts. "Be it before or now, you have helped me twice. I will never forget such a thing." He slowly exhaled, finally letting down his last guard against Roddy in his heart. The governor beside him smiled slightly bitterly. From what Angmar said, this scout Captain Roddy had helped him twice. Since it could be compared to what happened in front of him, it was definitely not a trivial matter. If that was the case, he shouldn't have treated him as an ordinary person from the beginning. After all, Rubens was shrewd. After thinking for a moment, he came up with a plan. He immediately turned around and bowed slightly to Roddy, saying happily, "Captain Roddy, I apologize for what I said before." Chapter 135. Roddy did not expect to be in the limelight in front of these two old foxes, and it was purely a coincidence that something like this had happened. But now, it seemed that he had unexpectedly won their favor, but these old guys were really good with their words, and Roddy knew that he could not ask for more. He could only laugh dryly and say, "It's okay, it's all a misunderstanding." Naturally, the lunch could not continue. Rubens also understood this. He immediately said a few words to Lord Duke about how to deal with the undead, and then politely greeted Roddy, turned around, and hurried back to the monastery. The appearance of the undead in the ducal palace was also a big deal for Rubens. The Tasman Kingdom's behavior definitely indicated something unknown, and he had to let the Holy Cathedral know of this important information as soon as possible. Roddy, who stayed in the dining hall, immediately asked Duke to thoroughly investigate everyone in the ducal palace, and to use his ring to screen for the existence of other undead. The Dukes of Angmar agreed without any hesitation, and immediately sent someone to gather all the members in the ducal palace. With this, the ducal palace immediately became lively. Nearly 100 servants, coachmen, butlers, forest guards, and so on were arranged to go to the mansion in an orderly manner, but under such circumstances, Sally, who had run out early, was still in a state of not knowing anything. In the garden behind the mansion, Sally was fiercely grabbing a leaf in her hand, constantly saying things like bastard, blockhead, and idiot. 16 years of age was still too young. Although Sally's growth over the past few months was extremely obvious, her growth was ultimately only reflected in her ability to deal with ordinary things. When it came to emotions, she was still a blank piece of paper. She was simply unable to control her emotions as freely as those old fellows who had been tempered by the passage of time. You said that in front of so many people. You must have already thought of how to get rid of me. In the slightly cold weather, it was not a good idea to wear a long dress and expose her collarbone. Sally pouted and complained a little, but she felt a little cold. Instead of leaving the back garden, she stubbornly stood there. Although she knew that there was a saying, being angry is punishing yourself with other people's mistakes, she would rather suffer this kind of punishment than go back and face Roddy. How disappointing! Sally suddenly realized that this seemed to be the only time Roddy took the initiative to express his feelings for her. But in the end, he wanted her to go as far and as long as possible. Did Roddy really hate her? She recalled that during their escape, Roddy had once mentioned a woman that he could not forget. As for that woman's information, Sally only knew that the woman had red hair and nothing else. Did she have to fight for status with a woman that she could not even see? It was unknown whether that woman was still alive or not. Every time Roddy mentioned her, he would be sad. Perhaps something had happened to him, or he had been hurt by her. Sally shook her head. Because of the cold weather, she shivered and hugged her shoulders with her small hands, looking delicate and pitiful. Her mind was full of all kinds of imaginary enemies. But after thinking about it for a few seconds, she fiercely stomped her feet and secretly spat. It had always been a group of knights throwing gloves at each other and fighting for a woman. When had the dignified daughter of Duke racked her brains to chase after a scout captain? This idiot, doesn't she know how to come out and find me? Sally pouted angrily. In the end, she decided to return to her bedroom. However, she had only taken a few steps when she saw a large group of servants rushing over from the back garden. Their voices traveled into her ears through the chilly wind. It seems to be the undead. Master said to check everyone's identity. How? Like last time? I don't know, but I heard that it has something to do with the scout captain. A large group of people rushed over. Sally raised her eyebrows and felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. The words revenant and scout captain aroused an irrepressible curiosity in her heart. She walked along the path, and when she met a servant girl along the way, she stopped her and asked, "What happened?" "Miss Sally, I don't know either. Just now, Lord Duke ordered us to go over. I just heard that they are going to do some kind of check." There were many servants in such a large mansion. The matter that had just happened a few minutes ago had not reached the point where everyone knew, so this servant girl was as confused as Sally. "If that's the case, it's okay, then you can go first." Sally smiled, but because of the cold, she once again tightened her arms around her shoulders. The doubt between her eyebrows deepened. After taking a few more steps, she happened to see the Knight of Wellington who was striding back from outside. The latter had a serious expression on his face. His body originally still carried some murderous aura, but when he saw Sally, this aura immediately disappeared completely. "Uncle Wellington." Sally greeted him politely. She did not know that the knight in front of her had just tied up the undead mirror in the room. At this time, she saw the purplish-red stains on his originally clean dress and suddenly asked, "This is blood stains?" Looking down at his body, Wellington did not deny it and nodded. "It is blood stains. Something happened in the dining room just now." "What happened?" Sally and Knight Wellington prepared to return to the mansion. She slightly lifted the corner of her dress as she walked forward. At this time, her face was full of confusion. She could not figure out how a meal could cause blood stains. That maid Mir is an undead. Just now, Captain Roddy saw through her disguise and subdued her. Oh, it was the second after you walked out of the dining room. Wellington usually looked like an emotionless robot, but in fact, his mind was much more flexible than Titus. He could see that Sally was sad because of what Roddy said. At this time, he naturally tried his best to improve Roddy's image, at least to make her happier. Sure enough, Sally's originally gloomy face suddenly lifted up after hearing this. Her little face turned pale as she asked, Undead? Mir? Isn't she? It's the one who has been standing behind you, I think." Captain Roddy was afraid that the undead would suddenly hurt you, so he deliberately said those words. Sally's footsteps instantly faltered, and she looked around with a panicked expression, at a complete loss. It was impossible for her to say that she wasn't afraid. After all, no one would be able to remain calm if they knew that the maid who had stayed in the Duke's residence for 10 years and saw her almost every day was an undead. Furthermore, Sally recalled that the dress she was wearing today seemed to have been tied by Mir. In other words, Roddy had once again saved her life? The face of the guy who was scolded by her as a bastard appeared in her mind. She immediately asked anxiously, "Then, Captain Roddy, is he not hurt?" "No, Captain Roddy is very decisive." Wellington shook his head. Seeing that Sally was so concerned, he couldn't help but feel that Roddy was really lucky. He chuckled and said, "The governor has already left. Sir Duke is chatting with him in the guest hall. Do you want to go over now?" I'll go change my clothes. Don't wait for me." After a moment of hesitation, Sally made up a random excuse and hurriedly ran away. Even after she changed out of her gorgeous dress, her little heart was still thumping wildly. Her initial anger and resentment had also turned into sweet happiness. So that guy was deliberately trying to anger me. Finally understanding that Roddy was doing this for her own good, Sally's heart knot was basically solved. However, she still decided to apologize to this fellow in person. After all, she could not shed so many tears for nothing in front of the governor and her father. However, when she walked to the side of the living room, she stopped in her tracks when she heard a voice coming from inside. "Speaking of which, I really have to praise you for being quick-witted to think of a way to let Sally escape in that kind of situation without batting an eyelid." The voice of the Dukes of Angmar was very easygoing, even with a hint of a smile. Actually, there was some misunderstanding with Miss Sally yesterday, so she seems to have some prejudice against me today." Roddy's voice revealed a little helplessness. "I don't know if it will work if I deliberately provoke her. I didn't think too much at that time. I just felt that even if she got angry and came over to beat me up, it would be good if she could stay away from that guy. This idiot." The corner of Sally's mouth slightly curled up. "That guy can't be killed. It's best to get all the information from her. I still have a letter here. It was found after I killed Alpha, but then, Roddy talked about the undead." Speaking of this, Sally remembered that it was this guy who saved her father. In this way, 2 generations of the Lucifron family were completely saved by him. If it weren't for him, perhaps this family would have been controlled by Francis. "I have a rough idea about the undead, but now I have a question." After asking a lot of questions, the Dukes of Angmar suddenly became slightly serious. "Francis and the orcs, what is going on?" When such a question was asked, Sally, who was eavesdropping at the side, felt her heart sink. Roddy thought for a moment. In fact, He already had many alternative answers to such questions, but when he thought of what Francis said in Cobb Forest, he felt that the seriousness of this matter had reached the point where he had to honestly talk about it. Actually, before this, I brought the scouts from Norland Village to the Orc Kingdom. When such words came out, even the two knights who had experienced hundreds of battles changed their expressions. The Dukes of Angmar straightened his back with a solemn expression, but did not ask whether it was true or not. Instead, he said in a low voice, "You killed a lot of orcs? In total, we killed more than 400 people, including more than 100 wolf riders and a witch doctor." Roddy was concise and to the point. He was not interested in showing off to this lord what he had done. The point is not how many orcs we killed, but the witch doctor. It was he who contacted Francis and secretly sent a team of wolf riders to intercept and kill Sally. You killed the witch doctor? What tribe? The Dukes of Angmar's tone suddenly became a little excited. Although Roddy was a little surprised, he still answered seriously, "It's the Hammer of Rohar." Chapter 136. There was a reason for the Dukes of Angmar's excitement. Not only did he know the name Hammer of Rohar, but he also had a connection with the Hammer of Rohar. In the 30 years that Angmar had been in power, the civilians of Eferton had been harassed by the orcs. Angmar had once ordered his soldiers to resist, but it had little effect. Situations like Ruger's, where the whole team was almost annihilated, could be seen everywhere. Such a shocking number of battles had dealt a heavy blow to the Lucifron family. In the end, they even lost their morale and did not dare to confront the orcs head-on. To the Dukes of Angmar, this was an absolute humiliation. The warg on the family emblem originally represented the illustrious achievements of Lucifron's first ancestor in the battle against the Beastmen. In the end, in this generation, he was chased around like a dog by the Hammer of Rohar. How could he not be angry? So, since 10 years ago, Angmar had sworn to collect this debt from the orcs. But after encountering the undead, this oath had been completely forgotten. But now, everything that Roddy had said made him lose control of his heart. Because Roddy's action was equivalent to directly washing away the humiliation that the orcs had brought to this family. And he had stepped on the orc's foot. Good. The two good in a row was enough to prove the excitement of the Dukes of Angmar. He would not suspect that Roddy was making up a story to scare him, because there was no need for that. His cheeks were slightly flushed, obviously a symptom of blood rushing to his head. But such emotions were quickly suppressed, and his voice became calm again. Continue. You killed the witch doctor? That's the problem. Roddy recalled the history that originally belonged to another time and space and said in a low voice, "The wisdom and leadership shown by the witch doctor far exceeded that of his chief. He also showed great intention to invade the kingdom of Karen. The outpost outside Norland Village that I led the team to eradicate is enough to prove this problem." He also promised Francis a lot of benefits and promised to give him the right to use at least 500 wolf riders to expand the territory. These words were all asked by Francis. Francis, who had his wrist chopped off back then, had revealed all the conditions that Sirota had promised him. Now, when Angmar heard this information, his fiery heart instantly turned cold, as though a bucket of cold water had been poured over it. Actually negotiating with the orcs, it's really... He shook his head and sighed. There were some things that he could not let go of in his heart, but at this moment, they had finally completely dispersed. His original thought for this son was still very optimistic. Even if he did not inherit the position of the feudal lord, at least he could be of some use. But now, it seemed that his previous plan was still a little naive. To put it bluntly, if Roddy had not done so many things, perhaps Ifta's territory would have been completely conquered by the orcs in no time. As for Sally, who was eavesdropping at the side, It was also the first time she heard about the deal between Francis and Sirota. Such a shocking thing immediately made some of her original guilt completely disappear. She only felt that the knot in her heart seemed to have completely disappeared with the secret that Roddy revealed. In the parlor, the discussion between Roddy and the Dukes of Angmar was still going on. But after that, it was the two knights who could not hold back their curiosity and asked a lot of questions about his journey in the Orc Kingdom. Regarding these questions, Roddy did not tell them all. He only vaguely brushed over many parts. After all, he could not explain clearly how he knew so much about the Orc Kingdom. He could only attribute this smooth journey to the enemy's carelessness and ignorance. As for how much the two knights and Duke believed, Roddy did not care. After all, both parties were already on the same side. They should share the resources that should be shared. There was no need for him to take out his private goods and explain it so clearly. After talking for a long time, Angmar felt that there was no need for Roddy to say so much at once. So, he appropriately changed the topic. He raised his head and looked around. Puzzled, he asked, "By the way, why is Sally not here yet? This lass, she's probably still angry." Changing the topic, Duke looked at Roddy with a faint smile. "Roddy, Sally seems to treat you differently than she treats others." Not far away, Sally, who had overheard everything, instantly blushed. She wanted to stand up and interrupt her father's straightforward question, but she was curious about how Roddy would answer. She bit her lips and finally decided to prick her ears and continue to eavesdrop with full concentration. "Miss Sally, she..." "Ahem, I think it might be because I happened to see her in a crisis a few times or something." After thinking for a long time in his mind, he thought of the phrase, "speak too much and make mistakes," and immediately used a jack-of-all-trades style to answer, "She's a good girl." And "I think so." Fortunately, there was no such thing as a good person card in this era. Otherwise, Sally, who was eavesdropping at this time, would probably immediately go berserk. "Heh. I won't ask too much about the matters of young people. But you have to understand, she will definitely be the Lord of Ifurta's territory in the future." Angmar did not care what Roddy thought. No matter how outstanding he was, a life-saving grace was a life-saving grace. Even if he wanted to repay the kindness, he would never choose to give his daughter away, not to mention that he only had one precious daughter left. "I understand this, I understand," Roddy nodded brainlessly. In his heart, he thought that old man really misunderstood. However, he could not show any other expression on his face, and could only grin foolishly. "Roddy, you can stay in the ducal palace for the next few days. No matter what, the Lucifron family will treat you as their most important friend. I can guarantee this." Seeing that it was almost time, Angmar gestured for Roddy to rest in the mansion. "As for the undead, let's talk about those things at night. How about it?" "No problem." Roddy nodded and then raised his first request since coming here. "The scouts are still in Cambay district. I think, if it's possible, they are all heroes of the Lucifron family and are also the pride of them." Angmar waved his hand and said with a smile, "To charge into the Orc Kingdom and escape unscathed, I can only dream about it. But now, you guys have really done it. No one is to be absent during the banquet." This was a completely approving attitude. It was obvious that the Dukes of Angmar was in a good mood. Roddy was also relieved after hearing this. Then, he followed the maid to the room to rest. However, just as he walked out of the guest hall, he saw a skirt disappearing at the end of the corridor. It was not difficult for Roddy to guess that it was Sally who left in a hurry. But at this moment, he was very puzzled. Why did she run? In the evening, Rose Cross Monastery. Vicar Rubens had returned here and was busy almost the entire afternoon. He had to copy several reports about the undead, to send to his superior, Cardinal Cade, and the archbishops of several other dioceses. Because of the long hours of work, when he finally finished writing the letters, he could not help but feel dizzy from old age. He sat on the chair for a long time and released a soul-awakening spell to gradually recover. I'm still old, shaking his head. He recalled everything that happened in the afternoon and could not help but feel a little embarrassed. Fortunately, all of this only happened in the dining hall. If Benjamin or any of the priests had followed him there, he was afraid that this kind of thing would soon become a laughingstock among his colleagues in the Holy Cathedral. Looking up at the window, he realized that it was already evening. He got up and was about to take a walk outside when he bumped into Benjamin, who was walking in from outside. "Quite a lot of things to do. Most of the arrangements have been made. I just came back from the city square to confirm if there are enough troops for the next speech." Benjamin's face was full of tiredness. He picked up the cup of water on the table and gulped down half of it. He looked very tired. There should be no problem with the speech on the 25th. It's just that Akasha was still not found. It's a pity after all. Rubens sighed and threw the insignificant pagan priest out of his mind. He changed the topic and said, "Oh yes, I heard something in the ducal palace at noon. It's related to the undead. Send these letters later. There are a lot of things involved, so it must be done as soon as possible." What happened in the ducal palace? Of course, Rubens would not tell him in detail. At this time, he saw that Benjamin was quite tired, so he sat down and asked, "Oh yes, you told me in the morning that you found the archer. I didn't have time to talk about it later. Do you have time to talk to me about it now?" Benjamin exhaled and took another sip of water. A trace of a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "This guy is very powerful. Some time ago, Sally was almost assassinated in the monastery. If not for him, I'm afraid I would not have the face to see you. There's such a thing?" Rubens raised his eyebrows slightly and asked with interest. After that, Benjamin told in detail everything that happened that day. He did not exaggerate. After listening to it, the superintendent felt that this person did indeed have some means and courage. In addition to the accurate archery that he displayed in the square, if he were to be introduced into the Holy Cathedral, he would probably be able to hold a high position. Then who is this guy? Where is he now? The superintendent was thinking about how to get in touch with Benjamin. When he asked this question, he had even begun to draw up a reward for Benjamin. Speaking of which, his identity is a little strange. Benjamin sighed. After doing so many things, can you believe that he's just the leader of a small scout team? The captain of the scout team? Rubens turned his head, and his expression suddenly became very strange. Then, what is his name? Roddy, the captain of the Lucifron family's scout team in Norland Village. According to his military rank, he should be a second lieutenant. Rubens? Although he could not be said to be a godly commander or a masterful strategist, Earl Moore was definitely one of the best among the leaders who could gather the soldiers and launch a counterattack when the orcs were invading the Callan kingdom one after another. Not only that, for a long period of time, the royal family, which had been stripped of its power, was almost completely protected by his several correct decisions, with such facts as a basis. Roddy naturally did not believe that such a powerful party would be defeated by some unknown small fry. But at this time, no one cared what he said to Rubens in the afternoon. Because in such a grand banquet, the participants were not the various nobles of Hollier City, but the scouts of Norland Village. In this era where low-level soldiers might not even get to see Duke for the rest of their lives, the scene of scouts drinking and chatting with the feudal lord would always be something impossible in the eyes of Carter, Ruger, and the others. But now, under the leadership of Knight Titus, they entered the ducal palace in a dignified manner. Under the service of a group of servants, they changed into brand new military uniforms, sat in the clean and bright dining hall, and used pure silver cutlery to gorge themselves on the sumptuous food in front of them. To them, everything that had happened was like a dream. This banquet was not just for the physiological satisfaction of eating and drinking, it was also the greatest affirmation of the hearts of all the soldiers after a long time of hard work. Roddy was very clear about one thing: there were only two reasons for participating in the war. One was for profit and the other was for fame. As non-mercenaries, the scouts did not have much desire for money, but their yearning for the glory in front of them was far deeper than anyone else's. If they could not obtain these things, who would rush to the battlefield from dawn to dusk? So at this time, looking at these subordinates laughing and talking loudly, Roddy could deeply feel the increasingly cohesive and high morale of the army. Of course, what he admired most was the Dukes of Angmar who agreed to this request, and also the two knights who sat together with the scouts at this time. In this era of strict hierarchy, such a scene was absolutely unique. I said before, we will not return until we are drunk today. Duke raised his cup high. Although he knew that his body had not recovered yet, he still drank the cup of ale in one gulp and said, "Awesome! Long live the feudal lord!" A burst of cheers sounded. The usually quiet dining hall was abnormally noisy at this time. Roddy's alcohol tolerance was not high. After drinking only 2 cups of ale since the beginning of the banquet, he was already a little dizzy. Fortunately, with his level and attributes advantage, he did not make a fool of himself. He looked at Sally, who was greeting the scouts, and felt a little helpless. In the afternoon, he went to find Sally to explain to her what happened at noon, but who knew that Sally would directly close the door and hide in the bedroom? Roddy waited for a long time, but she did not have any intention of opening the door, so he could only bitterly leave. When it was time for the banquet, Sally appeared in her splendid attire, as if nothing had happened. She smiled and greeted Sodeler and the others. She also greeted Jiang Yi, but she did not talk much with him. She only said a few formal sentences. What a headache! Roddy really could not figure out what this girl was thinking about, but his mind was not on women. At this time, seeing that there were finally fewer people around Knight Wellington, he walked over slowly and then whispered a greeting. "Knight Wellington, do you have time to talk?" Wellington lowered his head and looked at the guy who was a head shorter than him. He had a good impression of these scouts who could kill their way back and forth in the Orc Kingdom, so he smiled and replied, "Tell me, what can I help you with?" "It's about these scouts." Roddy and he walked to the corner of the dining hall. He gestured with his hands and said some of his ideas, about things like horsemanship and swordsmanship. This team is currently lacking a very experienced teacher. The 2 figures, one tall and one short, walked to the side while talking. Not far away, Sally, who seemed to be smiling and chatting with her father, secretly glanced at Roddy from the corner of her eyes. "Why? Are you only looking at him?" Angmar naturally noticed this. His whispered teasing made Sally's little face turn red. She wrinkled her nose, turned her gaze and snorted softly, "Who's looking at him?" "I didn't say who." Angmar laughed and changed the topic when his daughter's face suddenly turned red. He asked, "Oh yes, have you thought about the things that Reuben said?" "Thought about it? No, not yet." When Sally thought about the matter of going to the Holy Temple, that the governor mentioned, her little face suddenly became listless. Although she knew that this was an opportunity that countless nobles and believers dreamed of, she still missed that idiot. 2 years was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. If she left now, it would probably take 2.5 years before she could come back. At that time, she would be a young lady who was almost 19 years old. "I won't stop my daughter from doing what she wants to do. I just want you to know that no matter what decision you make, as a father, I will support you unconditionally." Angmar raised his hand and made a gesture to cover his mouth. He whispered, "Although the Rose Cross rules prohibit marriage, the bloodline of Lucifron must be passed down." "Father." Sally couldn't listen to it anymore. She simply covered her ears, and her face was as red as an apple. I'm only 16 years old. Don't talk to me about having a child. Okay. I won't say it. I won't say it. The Dukes of Angmar hurriedly stopped talking and raised his hand to make a gesture of surrender. This was a gesture that he often used to coax Sally when they were young. Now that he did it, it made the originally confused Sally feel a little sad, looking at the wrinkles on her father's face that could no longer be concealed and his body that was no longer strong. Sally also understood that the carefree times of the past would probably never return. She also knew that if she stayed in Hollier, she would probably only be able to slowly rise from priest. Although her starting point was already higher than others, it would take at least 3 to 5 years before she could become a bishop. Climbing further up would completely depend on luck. And if she followed Viceroy Rubens to the Holy Cathedral, not to mention the fact that she would definitely become a bishop in 2 years, just the connections and resources that she had accumulated in the church over the past 2 years were definitely not something that a priest in Hollier could compare to. More importantly, if something were to happen to her father's health, the position of suzerain and duke would be inherited by her. If she didn't have enough resources, how could she sit firmly in such a high position? Sally had long experienced the cruelty of reality, so at this moment she could naturally distinguish what she should choose. However, when she looked up at Roddy, she felt that she couldn't immediately make any ruthless decision. Throughout the afternoon, Sally had actually been hesitating. She didn't even dare to meet and talk to Roddy because she was afraid that Roddy would try to persuade her to stay. How should she choose if that happened? But seeing her father supporting her so much, Sally also gradually understood that these choices couldn't be made based on her own preferences. What was weighing on her back was the entire Lucifron family and the future of the Ifta territory. Chapter 138. On the other hand, Roddy, who was staggering back to his seat, was disappointed because the Knight of Wellington did not intend to teach the scout. No matter how Roddy asked, he would only reply with, "I'll see," or "I need to test him again." No matter how he looked at it, it was hopeless. "Sigh, it's not that easy to be a Spectre Knight. It seems like I have to find someone else." As he was thinking about this, Roddy suddenly realized that there was a beautiful figure in front of him. A familiar scent with a faint fragrance came to his face. He tried his best to widen his eyes and saw Sally's appearance clearly. He smiled and stuttered, I can't really drink, so don't laugh at me, I'm a little dizzy now, dizzy. I have something to talk to you about." Sally wanted to reach out and help him, but with so many people watching, she could only point to the outside of the restaurant and ask, "Can I go out for a while?" Roddy was puzzled, but he followed the direction she pointed and walked out of the restaurant. After taking a deep breath of the cool outdoor air, he turned back and said, "At noon, I know you did it to get me out of there, but that's not what I want to say." Sally stood in front of Roddy and looked at him with her big bright eyes. "I want to say that I've decided to follow the superintendent to the Holy Cathedral." It seemed easy to say such words, and Sally also tried to put on a calm expression, but no one knew that she was actually very nervous at this time. Roddy blinked as if he was digesting the meaning behind this sentence. Then, he felt that there was nothing wrong with Sally thinking this way, so he nodded, and Sally raised her eyebrows and looked at Roddy, who did not respond after the N. She was a little surprised for a moment. "You're not going to say anything to me?" That. Roddy's ability to organize his speech was also very poor due to the alcohol. The words that he wanted to say seemed to be blocked in his mind. At this time, he basically said whatever he thought of. "The Holy Cathedral is quite far from here. There are a few parishes along the way that you should pay attention to and make friends with. Rudy Parish is one, St. Jason is another. It's best to get familiar with their archbishops so that it'll be easier to talk to them in the future. I remember that you're good at blessing divine arts. You can find an old man called Jarvis to learn." The long-winded words came out of Roddy's mouth, and Sally widened her eyes as she listened. Suddenly, she realized that this guy in front of her seemed to be far more familiar with the situation of the Holy Cathedral than she was. Those names of places and people came out of his mouth. He had heard of some of them, but she had never heard of most of them. It was not the first time that Sally had seen Roddy's knowledge. She suddenly remembered that Roddy once said that his age and appearance would not change, and at this time, she quickly accepted it. Then she heard Roddy muttering a few numbers: 589, 590, 591. What? Sally, who did not quite understand, interrupted him. Roddy turned his head and asked abruptly, "Will you come back in 590 or 591? Should be in the spring of 591. It will take about 4 months to go back and forth from here to the Holy Cathedral. Although I do not know what will happen after Sirota dies." Roddy frowned slightly and looked at Sally. "But you may have to stay in the Holy Cathedral for a period of time." "Why?" Roddy exhaled. Facing Sally's question, he naturally would not say that the orcs would invade the northwest of the kingdom in the winter of 590. Even if the invasion did not happen, the kingdom would have a snowstorm that had not been seen for decades. This snowstorm that lasted for a month swept through the entire northwest of the kingdom. Everyone was caught off guard and suffered serious casualties. As a result, the roads were almost completely blocked. It was estimated that when the time came, Sally would not be able to find her way back even if she wanted to. "It's nothing. I suddenly thought that I might go to the south of the kingdom during this period. If there is a chance, I should be able to see you." Thinking about the future plans in his mind, Roddy naturally thought of avoiding this natural disaster. He reckoned that he would change his training location to the south, so he roughly told Sally about his plans. However, his casual words made Sally's somewhat depressed mood suddenly turn for the better. "You said, really?" And Roddy raised his head when he heard her serious tone. Seeing her bright eyes staring at him, he nodded. "There should be a chance. Then, it's settled." Sally raised her palm and made a vow gesture just like she did in the Silent Forest. Roddy blinked, feeling that he really could not keep up with her thoughts. However, looking at Sally's exuberant look, he felt that it was best not to provoke her anymore, so he could only raise his hand. "Silly girl, when the time comes, Rose Cross will be able to take good care of itself. It'll probably be hard for you to even find time to see me. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Before we leave, you must accompany me for a few more drinks." Sally immediately became carefree as soon as she got rid of her worries. She pulled Roddy towards the table, while Roddy, who followed behind her, had a bitter look on his face. "Damn it, I don't know how to drink." September 22nd, early morning. As Hollier gradually returned to its original calm, a caravan was slowly driving from the west into the vast Cobb Forest. As cities and villages were separated by forests, and the roads in between were dangerous, in this era, the economy of each country was basically in a self-sufficient state. There were not many caravans, and most of the time they did not earn much money. In most cases, the so-called profits were mostly distributed to the hired guards. At this moment, the caravan that entered the forest belonged to the Jeet Chamber of Commerce, an established chamber of commerce in the Iferta territory. There were a total of 24 people. 14 of them were mercenaries with weapons on their waists, while the remaining 10 were members of the Jeet Chamber of Commerce. But unlike other caravans or groups, this caravan was almost inaudible. If one followed the caravan, the only sound that echoed in their ears was the friction between wheels and bearings, as well as the dull echo of armor and weapons clashing. Apart from that, others would not be able to see any difference between this group and ordinary people. However, if a normal person were to follow the group, they would discover an extremely abnormal phenomenon. Everyone, including the mercenaries and merchants, did not show any signs of fatigue. They did not even rest once along the way, nor did they light up a fire for breakfast. As expected, the caravan should arrive at Hollier on the 26th. The one who spoke was the leader of the caravan. He sat in the only comfortable carriage in the caravan. His eyes were calm and his expression was calm. He looked to be about 45 or 56 years old, and his speech was rather imposing. It was obvious that he had been in a high position for a long time. The deputy sitting opposite him was a bald middle-aged man named Debbie. After hearing the leader's words, he continued, "Lord Magda, I was originally enough for this mission. You suddenly joined the caravan because of Lord Ansedin. I owe him a favor. He felt that he needed me to be double insurance for this kind of thing, so I will return the favor." Magda's tone was very cold, but there was still a hint of dissatisfaction in it. He raised his hand to take a look at the parchment and said with disdain, "The defense of the ducal palace, is this all they have? My lord, according to the information from our informants, the most troublesome ones should be these 2 knights. Coincidentally, there is a bishop from the Rose Cross and a bishop from the monastery in the city. But with you here, even if they go all out, I'm afraid they will be overestimating themselves." Although Debbie's words were somewhat flattering, there was nothing wrong with it if one looked at it objectively. After all, the person sitting in front of him was a strong person known as the Blighted One in the Tasman Kingdom. Magda, who was wearing ordinary clothes, closed his eyes slightly, as if he was recalling something. After a moment, he slowly said, "Titus Wellington, I remember now. 14 years ago, they followed Angmar to conquer what is now the southwest of Efta. The strength of those 2 young people is remarkable. At that time, Ansedin even wrote me a report." These words naturally showed that his previous position was much higher than Ansedin's. The report on their strength has been submitted, but it is obvious that they are not that strong. Debbie flipped through the report in front of him. His eyes swept across the strangely shaped weapon in the carriage, and his expression involuntarily showed some respect. Magda, however, was not interested in his words. Instead, he looked at the parchment and sighed. 14 years. In the short life of a human, how many 14 years are there? He casually put the parchment aside. The Lucifron family has existed for so long. I think I have seen their 3rd family head. More than 200 years have passed, and everything has changed. For an old monster like Magda, who had lived for hundreds of years, all glory and ostentatiousness had become fleeting clouds. After personally witnessing the rise and fall of each family, he had long lost interest in these relationships. Eternal life made it difficult to maintain all emotions. Time had worn away everything. The only thing that Magda was interested in now was to pursue greater power. "My Lord Magda, Lord Ansedin wants us to go to Gigtown after we finish our mission. It seems that he wants to go there personally in December. I will only help him this time. I am not interested in anything else." "Yes, my lord." Debbie hurriedly bowed his head. "These are all young people's tricks. Why must an old man like me participate? Ansedin has really not improved much these years." "The Blighted," Magda said as he raised his hand to pick up the weapon that was always placed beside him. His fingertips brushed across the bony surface, and then he lightly flicked the silver bowstring. This short bow that was enshrouded in powerful magic was condensed in his hand, and the entire bow body drew an icy blue light pattern. In the nearly forgotten history of mankind, the Blighted Magda had another terrifying title 200 years ago. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.